Welcome to Audiobook Empire. You are about to listen to The Law of Success by Napoleon Hill, Volume 6 of 8, covering accurate thought and concentration. This is the legendary 24-lesson course Napoleon Hill spent 20 years building and the direct foundation behind Think and Grow Rich. Narrated by Michael Stone, sit back and let's begin. Lesson 11: Accurate thought. It is pardonable to tell your friends, by tactful suggestion, of your needs, but take care not to ask them outright for assistance if you would retain their friendship. Lesson 11: Accurate thought. You can do it if you believe you can. If this is at one and the same time the most important, the most interesting, and the most difficult to present lesson of this entire course on the law of success. It is important because it deals with a principle which runs through the entire course. It is interesting for the same reason. It is difficult to present for the reason that it will carry the average student far beyond the boundary line of his common experiences and into a realm of thought in which he is not accustomed to dwell. Unless you study this lesson with an open mind, you will miss the very keystone to the arch of this course, and without this stone you can never complete your temple of success. This lesson will bring you a conception of thought which may carry you far above the level to which you have risen by the evolutionary processes to which you have been subjected in the past. And for this reason, you should not be disappointed if, at first reading, you do not fully understand it. Most of us disbelieve that which we cannot understand, and it is with knowledge of this human tendency in mind that I caution you against closing your mind if you do not grasp all that is in this lesson at the first reading. For thousands of years men made ships of wood and of nothing else. They used wood because they believed that it was the only substance that would float, but that was because they had not yet advanced far enough in their thinking process to understand the truth that steel will float and that it is far superior to wood for the building of ships. They did not know that anything could float which was lighter than the amount of water is displaced, and until they learned of this great truth, they went on making ships of wood. Until some 25 years ago, most men thought that only the birds could fly, but now we know that man can not only equal the flying of the birds, but he can excel it. Men did not know until quite recently that the great open void known as the air is more alive and more sensitive than anything that is on the earth. They did not know that the spoken word would travel through the ether with the speed of a flash of lightning without the aid of wires. How could they know this when their minds had not been unfolded sufficiently to enable them to grasp it? The purpose of this lesson is to aid you in so unfolding and expanding your mind that you will be able to think with accuracy, for this unfoldment will open to you a door that leads to all the power you will need in completing your temple of success. All through the preceding lessons of this course, you observed that we have dealt with principles which anyone could easily grasp and apply. You will also observe that these principles have been so presented that they led to success as measured by material wealth. This seemed necessary for the reason that to most people the word success and the word money are synonymous terms. Obviously, the previous lessons of this course were intended for those who look upon worldly things and material wealth as being all that there is to success. Presenting the matter in another way, I was conscious of the fact that the majority of the students of this course would feel disappointed if I pointed out to them a roadway to success that leads through other than the doorways of business and finance and industry. For it is a matter of common knowledge that most men want success that is spelled success. Very well, let those who are satisfied with this standard of success have it. But some there are who will want to go higher up the ladder, in search of success which is measured in other than material standards, and it is for their benefit in particular that this and the subsequent lessons of this course are intended. Accurate thought involves two fundamentals which all who indulge in it must observe. First, to think accurately you must separate facts from mere information. There is much information available to you that is not based upon facts. Second, you must separate facts into two classes, namely the important and the unimportant, or the relevant and the irrelevant. Only by so doing can you think clearly. All facts which you can use in the attainment of your definite chief aim are important and relevant. All that you cannot use are unimportant and irrelevant. It is mainly the neglect of some to make this distinction which accounts for the chasm which separates so widely people who appear to have equal ability and who have had equal opportunity. Without going outside of your own circle of acquaintances, you can point to one or more persons who have had no greater opportunity than you have had, and who appear to have no more, and perhaps less, ability than you, who are achieving far greater success. And you wonder why. Search diligently, and you will discover that all such people have acquired the habit of combining and using the important facts which affect their line of work. Far from working harder than you, they are perhaps working less and with greater ease. By virtue of their having learned the secret of separating the important facts from the unimportant, they have provided themselves with a sort of fulcrum and lever with which they can move with their little fingers loads that you cannot budge with the entire weight of your body. The person who forms the habit of directing his attention to the important facts out of which he is constructing his temple of success, thereby provides himself with a power which may be likened to a triphammer which strikes a 10-ton blow as compared to a tack hammer which strikes a 1-pound blow. If these similes appear to be elementary, you must keep in mind the fact that some of the students of this course have not yet developed the capacity to think in more complicated terms, and to try to force them to do so would be the equivalent of leaving them hopelessly behind. That you may understand the importance of distinguishing between facts and mere information, study that type of man who is guided entirely by that which he hears, the type who is influenced by all the whisperings of the winds of gossip, that accepts without analysis all that he reads in the newspapers and judges others by what their enemies and competitors and contemporaries say about them. Search your circle of acquaintances and pick out one of this type as an example to keep before your mind while we are on this subject. Observe that this man usually begins his conversation with some such term as this: "I see by the papers," or "they say." The accurate thinker knows that the newspapers are not always accurate in their reports, and he also knows that what "they say" usually carries more falsehood than truth. If you have not risen above the "I see by the papers" and the "they say" class, you have still far to go before you become an accurate thinker. Of course, much truth and many facts travel in the guise of idle gossip and newspaper reports. But the accurate thinker will not accept as such all that he sees and hears. This is a point which I feel impelled to emphasize, for the reason that it constitutes the rocks and reefs on which so many people flounder and go down to defeat in a bottomless ocean of false conclusions. In the realm of legal procedure, there is the great Edison failed 10,000 times before he made the incandescent electric light work. Do not become discouraged and quit if you fail once or twice before making your plans work. A principle which is called the law of evidence, and the object of this law is to get at the facts. Any judge can proceed with justice to all concerned if he has the facts upon which to base his judgment, but he may play havoc with innocent people if he circumvents the law of evidence and reaches a conclusion or judgment that is based upon hearsay information. The law of evidence varies according to the subject and circumstances with which it is used, but you will not go far wrong if, in the absence of that which you know to be facts, you form your judgments on the hypothesis that only that part of the evidence before you, which furthers your own interests without working any hardship on others, is based upon facts. This is a crucial and important point in this lesson. Therefore, I wish to be sure that you do not pass it by lightly. Many a man mistakes, knowingly or otherwise, expediency for fact, doing a thing or refraining from doing it, for the sole reason that his action furthers his own interest without consideration as to whether it interferes with the rights of others. No matter how regrettable, it is true that most thinking of today, far from being accurate, is based upon the sole foundation of expediency. It is amazing to the more advanced student of accurate thought how many people there are who are honest when it is profitable to them, but find myriads of facts to justify themselves in following a dishonest course when that course seems to be more profitable or advantageous. No doubt you know people who are like that. The accurate thinker adopts a standard by which he guides himself, and he follows that standard at all times, whether it works always to his immediate advantage, or carries him, now and then, through the fields of disadvantage, as it undoubtedly will. The accurate thinker deals with facts, regardless of how they affect his own interests, for he knows that ultimately this policy will bring him out on top, in full possession of the object of his definite chief aim in life. He understands the soundness of the philosophy that the old philosopher Croesus had in mind when he said, "There is a wheel on which the affairs of men revolve, and its mechanism is such that it prevents any man from being always fortunate." The accurate thinker has but one standard by which he conducts himself in his intercourse with his fellow men. And that standard is observed by him as faithfully when it brings him temporary disadvantage as it is when it brings him outstanding advantage. For being an accurate thinker, he knows that, by the law of averages, he will more than regain at some future time that which he loses by applying his standard to his own temporary detriment. You might as well begin to prepare yourself to understand that it requires the staunchest and most unshakable character to become an accurate thinker, for you can see that this is where the reasoning of this lesson is leading. There is a certain amount of temporary penalty attached to accurate thinking. There is no denying this fact, but while this is true, it is also true that the compensating reward in the aggregate is so overwhelmingly greater that you will gladly pay this penalty. In searching for facts, it is often necessary to gather them through the sole source of knowledge and experience of others. It then becomes necessary to examine carefully both the evidence submitted and the person from whom the evidence comes. And when the evidence is of such a nature that it affects the interest of the witness who is giving it, there will be reason to scrutinize it all the more carefully, as witnesses who have an interest in the evidence that they are submitting often yield to the temptation to color and pervert it to protect that interest. If one man slanders another, his remarks should be accepted, if of any weight at all, with at least a grain of the proverbial salt of caution. For it is a common human tendency for men to find nothing but evil in those whom they do not like. The man who has attained to the degree of accurate thinking that enables him to speak of his enemy without exaggerating his faults and minimizing his virtues is the exception and not the rule. Some very able men have not yet risen above this vulgar and self-destructive habit of belittling their enemies, competitors, and contemporaries. I wish to bring this common tendency to your attention with all possible emphasis because it is a tendency that is fatal to accurate thinking. Before you can become an accurate thinker, you must understand and make allowance for the fact that the moment a man or a woman begins to assume leadership in any walk of life, the slanderers begin to circulate rumors and subtle whisperings reflecting upon his or her character. No matter how fine one's character is or what service he may be engaged in rendering to the world, he cannot escape the notice of those misguided people who delight in destroying instead of building. Lincoln's political enemies circulated the report that he lived with a colored woman. Washington's political enemies circulated a similar report concerning him. Since both Lincoln and Washington were Southern men, this report was undoubtedly regarded by those who circulated it as being at one and the same time the most fitting and degrading one they could imagine. But we do not have to go back to our first president to find evidence of this slanderous nature with which men are gifted, for they went a step further in paying their tributes to the late President Harding and circulated the report that he had Negro blood in his veins. When Woodrow Wilson came back from Paris with what he believed to be a sound plan for abolishing war and settling international disputes, all except the accurate thinker might have been led to believe, by the reports of the They Say chorus, that he was a combination of Nero and Judas Iscariot. The little politicians and the cheap politicians and the interest-paid politicians and the plain ignorants who did no thinking of their own, all joined in one mighty chorus for the purpose of destroying the one and only man in the history of the world who offered a plan for abolishing war. The slanderers killed both Harding and Wilson, murdered them with vicious lies. They did the same to Lincoln, only in a somewhat more spectacular manner, by inciting a fanatic to hasten his death with a bullet. Statesmanship and politics are not the only fields in which the accurate thinker must be on guard against the They Say chorus. The moment a man begins to make himself felt in the field of industry or business, this chorus becomes active. If a man makes a better mousetrap than his neighbor, the world will make a beaten path to his door, no doubt about that, and in the gang that will trail along will be those who come, not to commend, but to condemn and to destroy his reputation. The late John H. Patterson, president of the National Cash Register Company, is a notable example of what may happen to a man who builds a better cash register than that of his neighbor. Yet, in the mind of the accurate thinker, there is not one scintilla of evidence to support the vicious reports that Mr. Patterson's competitors circulated about him. As for Wilson and Harding, we may only judge how posterity will view them by observing how it has immortalized the names of Lincoln and Washington. Truth alone endures, all else must pass on with time. The object of these references is not to eulogize those who stand in no particular need of eulogy, but it is to direct your attention to the fact that, they say, evidence is always subject to the closest scrutiny, and all the more so when it is of a negative or destructive nature. No harm can come from accepting as fact hearsay evidence that is constructive, but its opposite, if accepted at all, should be subjected to the closest inspection possible under the available means of applying the law of evidence. As an accurate thinker, it is both your privilege and your duty to avail yourself of facts, even though you are well on the road toward success if you have such a keen conception of life that you never build a plan which contemplates your requesting another person to do that which does not bring that person some corresponding advantage in return for compliance with your request. You must go out of your way to get them. If you permit yourself to be swayed to and fro by all manner of information that comes to your attention, you will never become an accurate thinker, and if you do not think accurately, you cannot be sure of attaining the object of your definite chief aim in life. Many a man has gone down to defeat because, due to his prejudice and hatred, he underestimated the virtues of his enemies or competitors. The eyes of the accurate thinker see facts, not the delusions of prejudice, hate, and envy. An accurate thinker must be something of a good sportsman, in that he is fair enough with himself at least to look for virtues as well as faults in other people, for it is not without reason to suppose that all men have some of each of these qualities. I do not believe that I can afford to deceive others. I know I cannot afford to deceive myself. 7. This must be the motto of the accurate thinker. With the supposition that these hints are sufficient to impress upon your mind the importance of searching for facts until you are reasonably sure that you have found them, we will take up the question of organizing, classifying, and using these facts. Look once more in the circle of your own acquaintances and find a person who appears to accomplish more with less effort than do any of his associates. Study this man and you observe that he is a strategist in that he has learned how to arrange facts so that he brings to his aid the law of increasing returns which we described in a previous lesson. The man who knows that he is working with facts goes at his task with a feeling of self-confidence, which enables him to refrain from temporizing, hesitating, or waiting to make sure of his ground. He knows in advance what the outcome of his efforts will be. Therefore, he moves more rapidly and accomplishes more than does the man who must feel his way, because he is not sure that he is working with facts. The man who has learned of the advantages of searching for facts as the foundation of his thinking has gone a very long way toward the development of accurate thinking, but the man who has learned how to separate facts into the important and the unimportant has gone still further. The latter may be compared to the man who uses a trip hammer and thereby accomplishes at one blow more than the former, who uses a tack hammer, can accomplish with 10,000 blows. Let us analyze briefly a few men who have made it their business to deal with the important or relevant facts pertaining to their life work. If it were not for the fact that this course is being adapted to the practical needs of men and women of the present workaday world, we would go back to the great men of the past: Plato, Aristotle, Epictetus, Socrates, Solomon, Moses, and Christ, and direct attention to their habit of dealing with facts. However, we can find examples nearer our own generation that will serve our purpose to better advantage at this particular point. Inasmuch as this is an age in which money is looked upon as being the most concrete proof of success, let us study a man who has accumulated almost as much of it as has any other man in the history of the world: John D. Rockefeller. Mr. Rockefeller has one quality that stands out, like a shining star, above all of his other qualities. It is his habit of dealing only with the relevant facts pertaining to his life work. As a very young man, and a very poor young man at that, Mr. Rockefeller adopted as his definite chief aim the accumulation of great wealth. It is not my purpose, nor is it of any particular advantage, to enter into Mr. Rockefeller's method of accumulating his fortune other than to observe that his most pronounced quality was that of insisting on facts as the basis of his business philosophy. Some there are who say that Mr. Rockefeller was not always fair with his competitors. That may or may not be true. As accurate thinkers, we will leave the point undisturbed, but no one, not even his competitors, ever accused Mr. Rockefeller of forming snap judgments or of underestimating the strength of his competitors. He not only recognized facts that affected his business wherever and whenever he found them, but he made it his business to search for them until he was sure he had found them. Thomas A. Edison is another example of a man who has attained to greatness through the organization, classification, and use of relevant facts. Mr. Edison works with natural laws as his chief aids, therefore he must be sure of his facts before he can harness those laws. Every time you press a button and switch on an electric light, remember that it was Mr. Edison's capacity for organizing relevant facts which made this possible. Every time you hear a phonograph, remember that Mr. Edison is the man who made it a reality through his persistent habit of dealing with relevant facts. Every time you see a moving picture, remember that it was born of Mr. Edison's habit of dealing with important and relevant facts. In the field of science, relevant facts are the tools with which men and women work. Mere information or hearsay evidence is of no value to Mr. Edison, yet he might have wasted his life working with it, as millions of other people are doing. Hearsay evidence could never have produced the incandescent electric light, the phonograph, or the moving picture, and if it had, the phenomenon would have been an accident. In this lesson, we are trying to prepare the student to avoid accidents. The question now arises as to what constitutes an important and relevant fact. The answer depends entirely upon what constitutes your definite chief aim in life, for an important and relevant fact is any fact which you can use without interfering with the rights of others in the attainment of that purpose. All other facts, as far as you are concerned, are superfluous and of minor importance at most. However, you can work just as hard in organizing, classifying, and using unimportant and irrelevant facts as you can in dealing with their opposites, but you will not accomplish as much. Up to this point, we have been discussing only one factor of accurate thought, that which is based upon deductive reasoning. Perhaps this is the point at which some of the students of this course will have to think along lines with which they are not familiar, for we come now to the discussion of thought which does much more than gather, organize, and combine facts. Let us call this creative thought. That you may understand why it is called creative thought, it is necessary briefly to study the process of evolution through which the thinking man has been created. Thinking man has been a long time on the road of evolution, and he has traveled a very long way. In the words of Judge T. Troward in Bible Mystery and Bible Meaning, perfected man is the apex of the evolutionary pyramid, and this by a necessary sequence. Let us trace thinking man through the 5 evolutionary steps through which we believe he has traveled, beginning with the very lowest, namely, the mineral period. Here we find life in its lowest form, lying motionless and inert, a mass of mineral substances with no power to move. Then comes the vegetable period. Here we find life in a more active form, with intelligence sufficient to gather food, grow, and reproduce, but still unable to move from its fixed moorings. Then comes the animal period. Here we find life in a still higher and more intelligent form, with ability to move from place to place. Then comes the human or thinking man period, where we find life in its highest known form, the highest because man can think, and because thought is the highest known form of organized salesmanship, consists very largely in knowing, and in showing the prospective buyer the real merits of the goods or service you are trying to sell. Energy in the realm of thought man knows no limitations. He can send his thoughts to the stars with the quickness of a flash of lightning. He can gather facts and assemble them in new and varying combinations. He can create hypotheses and translate them into physical reality through thought. He can reason both inductively and deductively. Then comes the spiritual period. On this plane, the lower forms of life, described in the previously mentioned 4 periods, converge and become infinitude in nature. At this point, thinking man has unfolded, expanded, and grown until he has projected his thinking ability into infinite intelligence. As yet, thinking man is but an infant in this 5th period, for he has not learned how to appropriate to his own use this infinite intelligence called spirit. Moreover, with a few rare exceptions, man has not yet recognized thought as the connecting link which gives him access to the power of infinite intelligence. These exceptions have been such men as Moses, Solomon, Christ, Plato, Aristotle, Socrates, Confucius, and a comparatively small number of others of their type. Since their time, we have had many who partly uncovered this great truth. Yet the truth itself is as available now as it was then. To make use of creative thought, one must work very largely on faith, which is the chief reason why more of us do not indulge in this sort of thought. The most ignorant of the race can think in terms of deductive reasoning, in connection with matters of a purely physical and material nature, but to go a step higher and think in terms of infinite intelligence is another question. The average man is totally at sea the moment he gets beyond that which he can comprehend with the aid of his 5 physical senses of seeing, hearing, feeling, smelling, and tasting. Infinite intelligence works through none of these agencies, and we cannot invoke its aid through any of them. How then may one appropriate the power of infinite intelligence is but a natural question, and the answer is through creative thought. To make clear the exact manner in which this is done, I will now call your attention to some of the preceding lessons of this course, through which you have been prepared to understand the meaning of creative thought. In the second lesson, and to some extent in practically every other lesson that followed it up to this one, you have observed the frequent introduction of the term autosuggestion, suggestion that you make to yourself. We now come back to that term again, because autosuggestion is the telegraph line, so to speak, over which you may register in your subconscious mind a description or plan of that which you wish to create or acquire in physical form. It is a process you can easily learn to use. The subconscious mind is the intermediary between the conscious thinking mind and infinite intelligence, and you can invoke the aid of infinite intelligence only through the medium of the subconscious mind, by giving it clear instructions as to what you want. Here you become familiar with the psychological reason for a definite chief aim. If you have not already seen the importance of creating a definite chief aim as the object of your life work, you will undoubtedly do so before this lesson shall have been mastered. Knowing from my own experience as a beginner in the study of this and related subjects, how little I understood such terms as subconscious mind and autosuggestion and creative thought. I have taken the liberty, throughout this course, of describing these terms through every conceivable simile and illustration, with the object of making their meaning and the method of their application so clear that no student of this course can possibly fail to understand. This accounts for the repetition of terms which you will observe throughout the course, and at the same time serves as an apology to those students who have already advanced far enough to grasp the meaning of much that the beginner will not understand at first reading. The subconscious mind has one outstanding characteristic to which I will now direct your attention. Namely, it records the suggestions which you send it through autosuggestion, and invokes the aid of infinite intelligence in translating these suggestions into their natural physical form, through natural means which are in no way out of the ordinary. It is important that you understand the foregoing sentence, for if you fail to understand it, you are likely to fail also to understand the importance of the very foundation upon which this entire course is built, that foundation being the principle of infinite intelligence, which may be reached and appropriated at will through aid of the law of the master mind described in the introductory lesson. Study carefully, thoughtfully, and with meditation the entire preceding paragraph. The subconscious mind has another outstanding characteristic. It accepts and acts upon all suggestions that reach it, whether they are constructive or destructive, and whether they come from the outside or from your own conscious mind. You can see, therefore, how essential it is for you to observe the law of evidence and carefully follow the principles laid down in the beginning of this lesson, in the selection of that which you will pass on to your subconscious mind through autosuggestion. You can see why one must search diligently for facts, and why one cannot afford to lend a receptive ear to the slanderer and the scandalmonger, for to do so is the equivalent of feeding the subconscious mind with food that is poison and ruinous to creative thought. The subconscious mind may be likened to the sensitive plate of a camera on which the picture of any object placed before the camera will be recorded. The plate of the camera does not choose the sort of picture to be recorded on it. It records anything which reaches it through the lens. The conscious mind may be likened to the shutter which shuts off the light from the sensitized plate, permitting nothing to reach the plate for record except that which the operator wishes to reach it. The lens of the camera may be likened to autosuggestion, for it is the medium which carries the image of the object to be registered to the sensitized plate of the camera. An infinite intelligence may be likened to the one who develops the sensitized plate after a picture has been recorded on it, thus bringing the picture into physical reality. The ordinary camera is a splendid instrument with which to compare the whole process of creative thought. First comes the selection of the object to be exposed before the camera. This represents one's definite chief aim in life. Then comes the actual operation of recording a clear outline of that purpose through the lens of autosuggestion on the sensitized plate of the subconscious mind. Till infinite intelligence steps in and develops the outline of that purpose in a physical form appropriate to the nature of the purpose. The part which you must play is clear. You select the picture to be recorded, definite chief aim. Then you fix your conscious mind upon this purpose with such intensity that it communicates with the subconscious mind through autosuggestion and registers that picture. You then begin to watch for and to expect manifestations of physical realization of the subject of that picture. Bear in mind the fact that you do not sit down and wait, nor do you go to bed and sleep, with the expectation of awaking to find that infinite intelligence has showered you with the object of your definite chief aim. You go right ahead in the usual way, doing your daily work in accordance with the instructions laid down in Lesson 9 of this course, with full faith and confidence that natural ways and means for the attainment of the object of your definite purpose will open to you at the proper time and in a suitable manner. The way may not open suddenly from the first step to the last, but it may open one step at a time. Therefore, when you are conscious of an opportunity, any man may become great by doing the commonplace things of life in a great spirit, with a genuine desire to be of helpful service to others, regardless of his calling. To take the first step, take it without hesitation, and do the same when the second, and the third, and all subsequent steps, essential for the attainment of the object of your definite chief aim, are manifested to you. Infinite intelligence will not build you a home and deliver that home to you, ready to enter, but infinite intelligence will open the way and provide the necessary means with which you may build your own house. Infinite intelligence will not command the cashier of your bank to place a definite sum of money to your credit, just because you suggested this to your subconscious mind, but infinite intelligence will open to you the way in which you may earn or borrow that money and place it to your own credit. Infinite intelligence will not throw out the present incumbent of the White House and make you president in his place. But infinite intelligence would most likely proceed, under the proper circumstances, to influence you to prepare yourself to fill that position with credit, and then help you to attain it through the regular method of procedure. Do not rely upon the performance of miracles for the attainment of the object of your definite chief aim. Rely upon the power of infinite intelligence to guide you through natural channels and with the aid of natural laws for its attainment. Do not expect infinite intelligence to bring to you the object of your definite chief aim. Instead, expect infinite intelligence to direct you toward that object. As a beginner, do not expect infinite intelligence to move quickly in your behalf, but as you become more adept in the use of the principle of autosuggestion, and as you develop the faith and understanding required for its quick realization, you can create a definite chief aim and witness its immediate translation into physical reality. You did not walk the first time you tried, but now, as an adult and adept at walking, you walk without effort. You also look down at the little child as it wobbles around, trying to walk, and laugh at its efforts. As a beginner in the use of creative thought, you may be compared to the little child who is learning to take its first step. I have the best of reasons for knowing that this comparison is accurate, but I will not state them. I will let you find out your own reason in your own way. Keep in mind always the principle of evolution, through the operation of which everything physical is eternally reaching upward and trying to complete the cycle between finite and infinite intelligences. Man himself is the highest and most noteworthy example of the working of the principle of evolution. First, we find him down in the minerals of the earth, where there is life but no intelligence. Next, we find him raised, through the growth of vegetation evolution, to a much higher form of life, where he enjoys sufficient intelligence to feed himself. Next, we find him functioning in the animal period, where he has a comparatively high degree of intelligence, with ability to move around from place to place. Lastly, we find him risen above the lower species of the animal kingdom, to where he functions as a thinking entity, with ability to appropriate and use infinite intelligence. Observe that he did not reach this high state all at one bound. He climbed step by step, perhaps through many reincarnations. Keep this in mind, and you will understand why you cannot reasonably expect infinite intelligence to circumvent the natural laws and turn man into the storehouse of all knowledge and all power, until he has prepared himself to use this knowledge and power with higher than finite intelligence. If you want a fair example of what may happen to a man who suddenly comes into control of power, study some newly rich or someone who has inherited a fortune. Money power in the hands of John D. Rockefeller is not only in safe hands, but it is in hands where it is serving mankind throughout the world, blotting out ignorance, destroying contagious disease, and serving in 1,000 other ways of which the average individual knows nothing. But place John D. Rockefeller's fortune in the hands of some young lad who has not yet finished high school, and you might have another story to tell, the details of which your own imagination and your knowledge of human nature will supply. I will have more to say on this subject in Lesson 14. If you have ever done any farming, you understand that certain preparations are necessary before a crop can be produced from the ground. You know, of course, that grain will not grow in the woods, that it requires sunshine and rain for its growth. Likewise, you understand that the farmer must plow the soil and properly plant the grain. After all this has been done, he then waits on nature to do her share of the work, and she does it in due time, without outside help. This is a perfect simile which illustrates the method through which one may attain the object of one's definite chief aim. First comes the preparing of the soil to receive the seed, which is represented by faith and infinite intelligence and understanding of the principle of autosuggestion and the subconscious mind through which the seed of a definite purpose may be planted. Then comes a period of waiting and working for the realization of the object of that purpose. During this period, there must be continuous, intensified faith, which serves as the sunshine and the rain, without which the seed will wither and die in the ground. Then comes realization, harvest time, and a wonderful harvest can be brought forth. I am fully conscious of the fact that much of that which I am stating will not be understood by the beginner at the first reading, for I have in mind my own experiences at the start. However, as the evolutionary process carries on its work, and it will do so, make no mistake about this, all the principles described in this and in all other lessons of this course will become as familiar to you as did the multiplication table after you had mastered it. And what is of greater importance still, these principles will work with the same unvarying certainty as does the principle of multiplication. Each lesson of this course has provided you with definite instructions to follow. The instructions have been simplified as far as possible, so anyone can understand them. Nothing has been left to the student except to follow the instructions and supply the faith in their soundness, without which they would be useless. In this lesson, you are dealing with 4 major factors to which I would again direct your attention with the request that you familiarize yourself with them. They are autosuggestion, the subconscious mind, creative thought, and infinite intelligence. These are the 4 roadways over which you must travel in your upward climb in quest of knowledge. Observe that you control 3 of these. Observe also, and this is especially emphasized, that upon the manner in which you traverse these 3 roadways will depend the time and place at which they will converge into the 4th, or infinite intelligence. You understand what is meant by the terms autosuggestion and subconscious mind. Let us make sure that you understand also what is meant by the term creative thought. This means thought of a positive, non-destructive, creative nature. The object of Lesson 8 on self-control was to prepare you to understand and successfully apply the principle of creative thought. If you have not mastered that lesson, you are not ready to make use of creative thought in the attainment of your definite chief aim. Let me repeat a simile already used by saying that your subconscious mind is the field or the soil in which you sow the seed of your definite chief aim. Creative thought is the instrument with which you keep that soil fertilized and conditioned to awaken that seed into growth and maturity. Your subconscious mind will not germinate the seed of your definite chief aim, nor will infinite intelligence translate that. Remember that your real wealth can be measured, not by what you have you are, but by what purpose into physical reality. If you fill your mind with hatred and envy and jealousy and selfishness and greed, these negative or destructive thoughts are the weeds which will choke out the seed of your definite purpose. Creative thought presupposes that you will keep your mind in a state of expectancy of attainment of the object of your definite chief aim, that you will have full faith and confidence in its attainment in due course and in due order. If this lesson does that which it was intended to do, it will bring you a fuller and deeper realization of the 3rd lesson of this course, on self-confidence. As you begin to learn how to plant the seed of your desires in the fertile soil of your subconscious mind, and how to fertilize that seed until it springs into life and action, you will then have reason, indeed, to believe in yourself. And after you have reached this point in the process of your evolution, you will have sufficient knowledge of the real source from which you are drawing your power to give full credit to infinite intelligence for all that you had previously credited to your self-confidence. Autosuggestion is a powerful weapon with which one may rise to heights of great achievement when it is used constructively. Used in a negative manner, however, it may destroy all possibility of success, and if so used continuously, it will actually destroy health. Careful comparison of the experiences of leading physicians and psychiatrists disclosed the startling information that approximately 75% of those who are ill are suffering from hypochondria, which is a morbid state of mind causing useless anxiety about one's health. Stated in plain language, the hypochondriac is a person who believes he or she is suffering with some sort of imaginary disease, and often these unfortunates believe they have every disease of which they ever heard the name. Hypochondriacal conditions are generally superinduced by auto-intoxication, or poisoning through failure of the intestinal system to throw off the waste matter. The person who suffers with such a toxic condition is not only unable to think with accuracy, but suffers from all sorts of perverted, destructive, illusory thoughts. Many sick people have tonsils removed or teeth pulled or the appendix taken out, when their trouble could have been removed with an internal bath and a bottle of citrate of magnesia, with due apologies to my friends, the physicians, one of the leading of whom gave me this information. Hypochondria is the beginning of most cases of insanity. Dr. Henry R. Rose is authority for the following typical example of the power of autosuggestion. If my wife dies, I will not believe there is a God. His wife was ill with pneumonia, and this is the way he greeted me when I reached his home. She had sent for me because the doctor had told her she could not recover. Most doctors know better than to make a statement such as this in the presence of a patient. She had called her husband and 2 sons to her bedside and bidden them goodbye. Then she asked that I, her minister, be sent for. I found the husband in the front room sobbing and the sons doing their best to brace her up. When I went into her room, she was breathing with difficulty, and the trained nurse told me she was very low. I soon found that Mrs. N had sent for me to look after her 2 sons after she was gone. Then I said to her, "You mustn't give up. You are not going to die. You have always been a strong and healthy woman, and I do not believe God wants you to die and leave your boys to me or anyone else." 5. I talked to her along this line, and then read the 10:3D Psalm and made a prayer in which I prepared her to get well rather than to enter eternity. I told her to put her faith in God and throw her mind and will against every thought of dying. Then I left her, saying, I will come again after the church service, and I will then find you much better. 5. This was on Sunday morning. I called that afternoon. Her husband met me with a smile. He said that the moment I had gone his wife called him and the boys into the room and said, Dr. Rose says that I am not going to die, that I am going to get well, and I am. 5. She did get well, but what did it? 2 things: auto-suggestion, superinduced by the suggestion I had given her, and faith on her part. I came just in the nick of time, and so great was her faith in me that I was able to inspire faith in herself. It was that faith that tipped the scales and brought her through the pneumonia. No medicine can cure pneumonia. The physicians admit that. There are cases of pneumonia, perhaps, that nothing can cure. We all sadly agree to that, but there are times, as in this case, when the mind, if worked upon and worked with in just the right way, will turn the tide. While there is life, there is hope, but hope must rule supreme and do the good that hope was intended to do. Here is another remarkable case showing the power of the human mind when used constructively. A physician asked me to see Mrs. H. He said there was nothing organically wrong with her, but she just wouldn't eat. Having made up her mind that she could not retain anything on her stomach, she had quit eating and was slowly starving herself to death. I went to see her and found first that she had no religious belief. She had lost her faith in God. I also found that she had no confidence in her power to retain food. My first effort was to restore her faith in the Almighty and to get her to believe that He was with her and would give her power. Then I told her that she could eat anything she wanted. True, her confidence in me was great and my statement impressed her. She began to eat from that day. She was out of her bed in 3 days for the first time in weeks. She is a normal, healthy, and happy woman today. What did it? The same forces as those described in the preceding case, outside suggestion, which she accepted in faith and applied through self-suggestion and inward confidence. There are times when the mind is sick and it makes the body sick. At such times it needs a stronger mind to heal it by giving it direction and especially by giving it confidence and faith in itself. This is called suggestion. It is transmitting your confidence and power to another, and with such force as to make the other believe as you wish and do as you will. It need not be hypnotism. You can get wonderful results with the patient wide awake and perfectly rational. The patient must believe in you, and you must understand the workings of the human mind in order to meet the arguments and questions of the patient. Each one of us can be a healer of this sort and thus help our fellow men. It is the duty of every person to read some of the best books on the forces of the human mind and learn what amazing things the mind can do to keep people well and happy. We see the terrible things that wrong thinking does to people, even going to such lengths as to make them positively insane. It is high time we found out the good things the mind can do, not only to cure mental disorders but physical diseases as well. You should delve deeper into this subject. I do not say the mind can cure everything. There is no reliable evidence that certain forms of cancer have been cured by thinking or faith or any mental or religious process. If you would be cured of cancer, you must take it at the very beginning and treat it surgically. There is no other way, and it would be criminal to suggest that there is. But the mind can do much with so many types of human indisposition and disease that we ought to rely upon it more often than we do. Napoleon, during his campaign in Egypt, went among his soldiers who were dying by the hundreds of the Black Plague. He touched one of them and lifted a second to inspire the others not to be afraid, for the we climbed to heaven mostly on the ruins of our cherished plans. Finding our failures were but friendly guideposts that led us onward and upward to success. Awful disease seemed to spread as much by the aid of the imagination as in any other way. Goethe tells us that he himself went where there was malignant fever and never contracted it because he put forth his will. These giants among men knew something we are slowly beginning to find out, the power of autosuggestion. This means the influence we have upon ourselves by believing we cannot catch a disease or be sick. There is something about the operation of the automatic or subconscious mind by which it rises above disease germs and bids defiance to them when we resolve not to let the thought of them frighten us, or when we go in and out among the sick, even the contagiously sick, without thinking anything about it. Imagination will kill a cat, so runs the old adage. It certainly will kill a man, or on the other hand, it will help him rise to heights of achievement of the most astounding nature, providing he uses it as the basis of self-confidence. There are authentic cases on record of men having actually died because they imagined they were cut by a knife across the jugular vein, when in reality a piece of ice was used and water was allowed to drip so they could hear it and imagine their blood was running out. They had been blindfolded before the experiment was begun. No matter how well you may be when you start for work in the morning, if everyone you meet should say to you, "How ill you look, you should see a doctor," it will not be long before you begin to feel ill, and if this keeps up a few hours, you will arrive at home in the evening as limp as a rag and ready for a doctor. Such is the power of the imagination or autosuggestion. The imaginative faculty of the human mind is a marvelous piece of mental machinery, but it may, and usually does, play queer tricks on us unless we keep constantly on guard and control it. If you allow your imagination to expect the worst, it will play havoc with you. Young medical students not infrequently become frightened and believe they have every disease on the medical calendar, as the result of medical lectures and classroom discussions of the various diseases. As has been stated, hypochondria may often be superinduced by toxic poisoning through improper elimination of the waste matter of the body. Also, it may be brought on by false alarm through improper use of the imagination. In other words, the hypochondriacal condition may have as its cause a real physical basis, or it may arise entirely as the result of allowing the imagination to run wild. Physicians are pretty well agreed upon this point. Dr. Schofield describes the case of a woman who had a tumor. They placed her on the operating table and gave her anesthetics when, lo, the tumor immediately disappeared and no operation was necessary. But when she came back to consciousness, the tumor returned. The physician then learned that she had been living with a relative who had a real tumor and that her imagination was so vivid that she had imagined this one upon herself. She was placed on the operating table again, given anesthetics, and then she was strapped around the middle so that the tumor could not artificially return. When she revived, she was told that a successful operation had been performed, but that it would be necessary to wear the bandage for several days. She believed the doctor, and when the bandage was finally removed, the tumor did not return. No operation whatever had been performed. She had simply relieved her subconscious mind of the thought that she had a tumor, and her imagination had nothing to work upon save the idea of health. And as she had never really been sick, of course she remained normal. The mind may be cured of imaginary ills in exactly the same manner that it became diseased with those ills, by autosuggestion. The best time to work on a faulty imagination is at night, just as you are ready to go to sleep, for then the automatic or subconscious mind has everything its own way, and the thoughts or suggestions you give it just as your conscious or day mind is about to go off duty will be taken up and worked on during the night. This may seem impossible, but you can easily test the principle by the following procedure. You wish to get up at 7 o'clock tomorrow morning, or at some hour other than your regular time to awaken. Say to yourself as you are about ready to go to sleep, "I must arise at 7 o'clock tomorrow without fail." Repeat this several times, at the same time impressing the fact upon your mind that you must actually arise at the precise moment mentioned. Turn this thought over to your subconscious mind with absolute confidence that you will awaken at 7 o'clock, and when that hour arrives, your subconscious mind will awaken you. This test has been successfully made hundreds of times. The subconscious mind will awaken you at any hour you demand, just as if someone came to your bed and tapped you on the shoulder. But you must give the command in no uncertain or indefinite terms. Likewise, the subconscious mind may be given any other sort of orders, and it will carry them out as readily as it will awaken you at a given hour. For example, give the command as you are about to go to sleep each night for your subconscious mind to develop self-confidence, courage, initiative, or any other quality, and it will do your bidding. If the imagination of man can create imaginary ills and send one to bed with those ills, it can also, and just as easily, remove the cause of those ills. Man is a combination of chemical equivalents, the value of which is said to be about $26, with the exception, of course, of that stupendous power called the human mind. In the aggregate, the mind seems to be a complicated machine, but in reality, as far as the manner in which it may be used is concerned, it is the nearest thing to perpetual motion that is known. It works automatically when we are asleep. It works both automatically and in conjunction with the will or voluntary section when we are awake. The mind is deserving of the minutest possible analysis in this lesson because the mind is the energy with which all thinking is done. To learn how to think accurately, the teaching of which is the sole object of this lesson, one must thoroughly understand, first, that the mind can be controlled, guided, and directed to creative, constructive ends. Second, that the mind can be directed to destructive ends, and that it may voluntarily tear down and destroy unless it is with plan and deliberation controlled and directed constructively. Third, that the mind has power over every cell of the body and can be made to cause every cell to do its intended work perfectly, or it may, through neglect or wrong direction, destroy the normal functionary purposes of any or all cells. Fourth, that all achievement of man is the result of thought, the part which his physical body plays being of secondary importance, and in many instances of no importance whatsoever except as a housing place for the mind. Fifth, that the greatest of all achievements, whether in literature, art, finance, industry, commerce, transportation, religion, politics, or scientific discoveries, are usually the results of ideas conceived in one man's brain but actually transformed into reality by other men through the combined use of their minds and bodies. Meaning that the conception of an idea is of greater importance than the transformation of that idea into more material form, because relatively few men can conceive useful ideas, while there are hundreds of millions who can develop an idea and give it material form after it has been conceived. Sixth, the majority of all thoughts conceived in the minds of men are not accurate, being more in the nature of opinions or snap judgments. When Alexander the Great sighed because he had no more worlds, as he believed, that could be conquered, he was in a frame of mind similar to that of the present-day Alexanders of science, industry, invention, and so on. Their accurate thoughts have conquered the air and the sea, and explored practically every square mile of the little earth on which we live, wresting from nature thousands of secrets which, a few generations ago, would have been set down as miracles of the most astounding and imponderable sort. In all this discovery and mastery of mere physical substances, is it not strange, indeed, that we have practically neglected and overlooked the most marvelous of all powers, the human mind? All scientific men who have made a study of the human mind readily agree on this, that the surface has not yet been scratched in the study of the wonderful power which lies dormant in the mind of man, waiting, as the oak tree sleeps in the acorn, to be aroused and put to work. Those who have expressed themselves on the subject are of the opinion that the next great cycle of discovery lies in the realm of the human mind. The possible nature of these discoveries has been suggested, in many different ways, in practically every lesson of this course, particularly in this and the following lessons of the course. If these suggestions appear to lead the student of this philosophy into deeper water than he or she is accustomed to, bear in mind the fact that the student has the privilege of stopping at any depth desired, until ready, through thought and study, to go further. The author of this course has found it necessary to take the lead, and to keep far enough ahead, as it were, to induce the student to go at least a few paces ahead of the normal average range of human thought. It is not expected that any beginner will, at first, try to assimilate and put into use all that has been included in this philosophy. But if the net result of the course is nothing more than to sow the seed of constructive thought in the mind of the student, the author's work will have been completed. Time, plus the student's own desire for knowledge, will do the rest. This is an appropriate place to state frankly that many of the suggestions passed on through this course would, if literally followed, lead the student far beyond the necessary bounds and present needs of what is ordinarily called business philosophy. Stated differently, this course goes more deeply into the functioning processes of the human mind than is necessary as far as the use of this philosophy as a means of achieving business or financial success is concerned. However, it is presumed that many students of this course will wish to go more deeply into the study of mind power than may be required for purely material achievement, and the author has had in mind these students throughout the labor of organizing and writing this course. Summary of principles involved in accurate thinking. We have discovered that the body of man is not singular, but plural, that it consists of billions on top of billions of living, intelligent, individual cells which carry on a very definite, well-organized work of building, developing and maintaining the human body. We have discovered that these cells are directed in their respective duties by the subconscious or automatic action of the mind, that the subconscious section of the mind can be, to a very large extent, controlled and directed by the conscious or voluntary section of the mind. We have found that any idea or thought which is held in the mind through repetition has a tendency to direct the physical body to transform such thought or idea into its material equivalent. We have found that any order that is properly given to the subconscious section of the mind, through the law of autosuggestion, will be carried out unless it is sidetracked or countermanded by another and stronger order. We have found that the subconscious mind does not question the source from which it receives orders, nor the soundness of those orders, but it will proceed to direct the muscular system of the body to carry out any order it receives. This explains the necessity for guarding closely the environment from which we receive suggestions, and by which we are subtly and quietly influenced at times, and in ways of which we do not take cognizance through the conscious mind. We have found that every movement of the human body is controlled by either the conscious or the subconscious section of the mind, that not a muscle can be moved until an order has been sent out by one or the other of these two sections of the mind for the movement. When this principle is thoroughly understood, we understand, also, the powerful effect of any idea or thought which we create through the faculty of imagination, and hold in the conscious mind until the subconscious section of the mind has time to take over that thought and begin the work of transforming it into its material counterpart. When we understand the principle through which any idea is first placed in the conscious mind, and held there until the subconscious section of the mind picks it up and appropriates it, we have a practical working knowledge of the law of concentration, covered by next lesson, and it might be added, we have also a thorough understanding of the reason why the law of concentration is necessarily a part of this philosophy. When we understand this working relationship between the imagination, the conscious mind, and the subconscious section of the mind, we can see that the very first step in the achievement of any definite chief aim is to create a definite picture of that which is desired. This picture is then placed in the conscious mind through the law of concentration, and held there through the formulas described in next lesson, until the subconscious section of the mind picks it up and translates it into its ultimate and desired form. Surely this principle has been made clear. It has been stated and restated over and over, not only for the purpose of thoroughly describing it, but of greater importance to impress upon the mind of the student the part it plays in all human achievement. The value of adopting a chief aim. This lesson on accurate thought not only describes the real purpose of a definite chief aim, but it explains in simple terms the principles through which such an aim or purpose may be realized. We first create the objective toward which we are striving through the imaginative faculty of the mind, then transfer an outline of this objective to paper by writing out a definite statement of it in the nature of a definite chief aim. By daily reference to this written statement, the idea or thing aimed for is taken up by the conscious mind and handed over to the subconscious mind, which, in turn, directs the energies of the body to transform the desire into material form. Desire, strong, deeply rooted desire, is the starting point of all achievement. Just as the electron is the last unit of matter discernible to the scientist, desire is the seed of all achievement, the starting place, back of which there is nothing, or at least there is nothing of which we have any knowledge. A definite chief aim, which is only another name for desire, would be meaningless unless based upon a deeply seated, strong desire for the object of the chief aim. Many people wish for many things, but a wish is not the equivalent of a strong desire, and therefore wishes are of little or no value unless they are crystallized into the more definite form of desire. It is believed by men who have devoted years of research to the subject that all energy and matter throughout the universe respond to and are controlled by the law of attraction, which causes elements and forces of a similar nature to gather around certain centers of attraction. It is through the operation of this same universal law of attraction that Constant W.M.W.R.I.G.L.E.Y. Jr. has amassed a tremendous fortune by concentrating all his efforts on the manufacture and distribution of the best package of chewing gum, proving once more that the seed of success lies wrapped up in the little things of life. Deeply seated, strong desire attracts the physical equivalent or counterpart of the thing desired, or the means of securing it. We have learned then, if this hypothesis is correct, that all cycles of human achievement work somewhat after this fashion. First, we picture in our conscious minds, through a definite chief aim based upon a strong desire, some objective. We then focus our conscious mind upon this objective, by constant thought of it and belief in its attainment, until the subconscious section of the mind takes up the picture or outline of this objective and impels us to take the necessary physical action to transform that picture into reality. Suggestion and auto-suggestion. Through this and other lessons of the Law of Success course, the student has learned that sense impressions arising out of one's environment or from statements or actions of other people are called suggestions, while sense impressions that we place in our own minds are placed there by self-suggestion or auto-suggestion. All suggestions coming from others or from environment influence us only after we have accepted them and passed them on to the subconscious mind through the principle of auto-suggestion. Thus it is seen that suggestion becomes and must become auto-suggestion before it influences the mind of the one receiving it. Stated in another way, no one may influence another without the consent of the one influenced, as the influencing is done through one's own power of autosuggestion. The conscious mind stands during the hours when one is awake as a sentinel, guarding the subconscious mind and warding off all suggestions which try to reach it from the outside, until those suggestions have been examined by the conscious mind, passed upon and accepted. This is nature's way of safeguarding the human being against intruders who would otherwise take control of any mind desired at will. It is a wise arrangement. The value of autosuggestion in accomplishing the object of your definite chief aim, one of the greatest uses to which one may direct the power of autosuggestion, is that of making it help accomplish the object of one's definite chief aim in life. The procedure through which this may be accomplished is very simple. While the exact formula has been stated in Lesson 2 and referred to in many other lessons of the course, the principle upon which it is based will be here, again, described, viz. Write out a clear, concise statement of that which you intend to accomplish as your definite chief aim, covering a period of, let us say, the next 5 years. Make at least 2 copies of your statement, one to be placed where you can read it several times a day while you are at work, and the other to be placed in the room where you sleep, where it can be read several times each evening before you go to sleep and just after you arise in the morning. The suggestive influence of this procedure, impractical though it may seem, will soon impress the object of your definite chief aim on your subconscious mind, and as if by a stroke of magic, you will begin to observe events taking place which will lead you nearer and nearer the attainment of that object. From the very day that you reach a definite decision in your own mind as to the precise thing, condition, or position in life that you deeply desire, you will observe, if you read books, newspapers, and magazines, that important news items and other data bearing on the object of your definite chief aim will begin to come to your attention. You will observe also that opportunities will begin to come to you that will, if embraced, lead you nearer and nearer the coveted goal of your desire. No one knows better than the author of this course how impossible and impractical this may seem to the person who is not informed on the subject of mind operation. However, this is not an age favorable to the doubter or the skeptic, and the best thing for any person to do is to experiment with this principle until its practicality has been established. To the present generation it may seem that there are no more worlds to conquer in the field of mechanical invention, but every thinker, even those who are not accurate thinkers, will concede that we are just entering a new era of evolution, experiment, and analysis as far as the powers of the human mind are concerned. The word impossible means less now than ever before in the history of the human race. There are some who have actually removed this word from their vocabularies, believing that man can do anything he can imagine and believe he can do. We have learned for sure that the universe is made up of 2 substances, matter and energy. Through patient scientific research, we have discovered what we believe to be good evidence that everything that is or ever has been in the way of matter, when analyzed to the finest point, can be traced back to the electron, which is nothing but a form of energy. On the other hand, every material thing that man has created began in the form of energy, through the seed of an idea that was released through the imaginative faculty of the human mind. In other words, the beginning of every material thing is energy, and the ending of it is energy. All matter obeys the command of one form or another of energy. The highest known form of energy is that which functions as the human mind. The human mind, therefore, is the sole directing force of everything man creates and what he may create with. This force in the future, as compared with that which he has created with it in the past, will make his past achievements seem petty and small. We do not have to wait for future discoveries, in connection with the powers of the human mind, for evidence that the mind is the greatest force known to mankind. We know now that any idea, aim, or purpose that is fixed in the mind, and held there with a will to achieve or attain its physical or material equivalent, puts into motion powers that cannot be conquered. Buxton said, "The longer I live, the more certain I am that the great difference between men, between the feeble and the powerful, the great and the insignificant, is energy, invincible determination, a purpose once fixed, and then death or victory. That quality will do anything that can be done in this world, and no talents, no circumstances, no opportunities will make a 2-legged creature a man without it." Donald G. Mitchell has well said, "Resolve is what makes a man manifest, not puny resolve, not crude determinations, not errant purposes, but that strong and indefatigable will which treads down difficulties and danger, as a boy treads down the heaving frostlands of winter, which kindles his eye and brain with proud pulse beat toward the unattainable. Will makes men giants," the great Disraeli said. "I have brought myself by long meditation to the conviction that a human being with a settled purpose must accomplish it, and that nothing can resist a will which will stake even existence upon its fulfillment. Sir John Simpson said, "A passionate desire and an unwearied will can perform impossibilities, or what may seem to be such to the cold, timid and feeble," and John Foster adds his testimony when he says, "It is wonderful how even the casualties of life seem to bow to a spirit that will not bow to them, and yield to subserve a design which they may, in their first apparent tendency, threaten to frustrate." When a firm, decisive spirit is recognized, it is curious to see how the space clears around a man and leaves him room and freedom. Abraham Lincoln said of General Grant, "The great thing about Grant is his cool persistency of purpose. He is not easily excited, and he has got that the most successful physicians are those who mix hope and faith with the medicines they prescribe. Grip of a bulldog. When he once gets his teeth in, nothing can shake him off." It seems appropriate to state here that a strong desire to be transformed into reality must be backed with persistency until it is taken over by the subconscious mind. It is not enough to feel very deeply the desire for achievement of a definite chief aim for a few hours or a few days, and then forget all about that desire. The desire must be placed in the mind and held there with persistence that knows no defeat until the automatic or subconscious mind takes it over. Up to this point, you must stand back of the desire and push it. Beyond this point, the desire will stand back of you and push you on to achievement. Persistence may be compared to the dropping of water which finally wears away the hardest stone. When the final chapter of your life shall have been completed, it will be found that your persistence, or lack of this sterling quality, played an important part in either your success or your failure. This author watched the Tunney Dempsey fight in Chicago. He also studied the psychology leading up to and surrounding their previous bout. Two things helped Tunney defeat Dempsey on both occasions, despite the fact that Dempsey is the stronger of the two men, and as many believe, the better fighter. And these two things, which spelled Dempsey's doom, were first his own lack of self-confidence, the fear that Tunney might defeat him, and second, Tunney's complete self-reliance and his belief that he would whip Dempsey. Tunney stepped into the ring with his chin in the air, an atmosphere of self-assurance and certainty written in his every movement. Dempsey walked in with a sort of uncertain stride, eyeing Tunney in a manner that plainly queried, "I wonder what you'll do to me." Dempsey was whipped in his own mind before he entered the ring. Press agents and propagandists had done the trick, thanks to the superior thinking ability of his opponent, Tunney. And so the story goes from the lowest and most brutal of occupations, prize fighting, on up to the highest and most commendable professions. Success is won by the man who understands how to use his power of thought. Throughout this course, much stress has been laid upon the importance of environment and habit, out of which grow the stimuli that put the wheels of the human mind into operation. Fortunate is the person who has found how to arouse or stimulate his or her mind so that the powers of that mind will function constructively, as they may be made to do when placed back of any strong, deeply seated desire. Accurate thinking is thinking that makes intelligent use of all the powers of the human mind, and does not stop with the mere examination, classification, and arranging of ideas. Accurate thought creates ideas, and it may be made to transform these ideas into their most profitable, constructive form. The student will perhaps be better prepared to analyze, without a feeling of skepticism and doubt, the principles laid down in this lesson, if the fact is kept in mind that the conclusions and hypotheses here enumerated are not solely those of the author. I have had the benefit of close cooperation from some of the leading investigators in the field of mental phenomena, and conclusions reached, as stated in this entire course, are those of many different minds. In the lesson on concentration, you will be further instructed in the method of applying the principle of autosuggestion. In fact, throughout the course, the principle of gradual unfoldment has been followed, paralleling that of the principle of evolution as nearly as possible. The first lesson laid the foundation for the second, and the second prepared the way for the third, and so on. I have tried to build this course just as nature builds a man, by a series of steps each of which lifts the student just another step higher, and nearer the apex of the pyramid which the course, as a whole, represents. The purpose in building this course in the manner outlined is one that cannot be described in words, but that purpose will become obvious and clear to you as soon as you shall have mastered the course. For its mastery will open to you a source of knowledge which cannot be imparted by one man to another, but is attainable only by educing, drawing out, and expanding from within one's own mind. The reason this knowledge cannot be imparted by one to another is the same as that which makes it impossible for one person to describe colors to a blind person who has never seen colors. The knowledge of which I write became obvious to me only after I had diligently and faithfully followed the instructions which I have laid down in this course for your guidance and enlightenment. Therefore, I speak from experience when I say that there are no illustrations, similes, or words with which to describe this knowledge adequately. It can only be imparted from within. With this vague hint as to the reward which awaits all who earnestly and intelligently search for the hidden passageway to knowledge to which I refer, we will now discuss that phase of accurate thought which will take you as high as you can go except through the discovery and use of the secret passageway to which I have alluded. Thoughts are things. It is the belief of many that every completed thought starts an unending vibration with which the one who releases it will have to contend at a later time. That man himself is but the physical reflection of thought that was put into motion by infinite intelligence. And the Word was made flesh and dwelt among us, and we beheld his glory, the glory as of the only begotten of the Father, full of grace and truth. St. John I, 13. The only hope held out to mankind in the entire Bible is of a reward which may be attained in no way except by constructive thought. This is a startling statement, but if you are even an elementary student and interpreter of the Bible, you understand that it is a true statement. If the Bible is plain on any one point above all others, it is on the fact that thought is the beginning of all things of a material nature. At the beginning of every lesson of this course you will observe this motto: you can do it if you believe you can. This sentence is based upon a great truth which is practically the major premise of the entire Bible teaching. Observe the emphasis which is placed upon the word believe. Back of this word believe lies the power with which you can vitalize and give life to the suggestions that you pass on to your subconscious mind, through the principle of autosuggestion, with the aid of the law of the master mind. Do not miss this point. You cannot afford to miss it, as it is the very beginning, the middle, and the end of all the power you will ever have. All thought is creative. However, not all thought is constructive or positive. If you think thoughts of misery and poverty and see no way to avoid these conditions, then your thoughts will create those very conditions and curse you with them. But reverse the order and think thoughts of a positive, expectant nature, and your thoughts will create those conditions. Thought magnetizes your entire personality and attracts to you the outward physical things that harmonize with the nature of your thoughts. This has been made clear in practically every lesson preceding this one, yet it is repeated here and will be repeated many times more in the lessons that follow. The reason for this constant repetition is that nearly all beginners in the study of mind operation overlook the importance of this fundamental and eternal truth. When you plant a definite chief aim in your subconscious mind, you must fertilize it with full belief that infinite intelligence will step in and mature. First acquire patience and perseverance, then make up your mind what else you want, and you will be almost sure to get it. That purpose into reality in exact accordance with the nature of the purpose. Anything short of such belief will bring you disappointment. When you suggest a definite chief aim which embodies some definite desire in your subconscious mind, you must accompany it with such faith and belief in the ultimate realization of that purpose that you can actually see yourself in possession of the object of the purpose. Conduct yourself in the exact manner in which you would if you were already in possession of the object of your definite purpose, from the moment you suggest it to your subconscious mind. Do not question. Do not wonder if the principles of autosuggestion will work. Do not doubt, but believe. Surely this point has been sufficiently emphasized to impress upon your mind its importance. Positive belief in the attainment of your definite purpose is the very germ with which you fertilize the egg of your thought, and if you fail to give it this fertilization, you might as well expect an unfertilized hen egg to produce a chicken as to expect the attainment of the object of your definite chief aim. You never can tell what a thought will do in bringing you hate or love, for thoughts are things and their airy wings are swifter than a carrier dove. They follow the law of the universe. Each thought creates its kind, and they speed o'er the track to bring you back whatever went out from your mind. Thoughts are things. This is a great truth which, when you understand it, will bring you as close to the door of that secret passageway to knowledge, previously mentioned, as is possible for another person to bring you. When you grasp this fundamental truth, you will soon find that door and open it. The power to think as you wish to think is the only power over which you have absolute control. Please read and study the foregoing sentence until you grasp its meaning. If it is within your power to control your thoughts, the responsibility then rests upon you as to whether your thoughts will be of the positive or the negative type, which brings to mind one of the world's most famous poems. Out of the night that covers me, black as the pit from pole to pole, I thank whatever gods may be for my unconquerable soul. In the fell clutch of circumstance I have not winced or cried aloud. Under the bludgeonings of chance my head is bloody, but unbowed. Beyond this place of wrath and tears looms but the horror of the shade, and yet the menace of the years finds and shall find me unafraid. It matters not how strait the gate, how charged with punishments the scroll, I am the master of my fate, I am the captain of my soul. Henley did not write this poem until after he had discovered the door to that secret passageway which I have mentioned. You are the master of your fate and the captain of your soul, by reason of the fact that you control your own thoughts, and with the aid of your thoughts, you may create whatever you desire. As we approach the close of this lesson, let us pull aside the curtain that hangs over the gateway called death and take a look into the great beyond. Behold a world peopled with beings who function without the aid of physical bodies. Look closely, and whether for weal or for woe, observe that you look at a world peopled with beings of your own creation, which correspond exactly to the nature of your own thoughts as you express them before death. There they are, the children of your own heart and mind, patterned after the image of your own thoughts. Those which were born of your hatred and envy and jealousy and selfishness and injustice toward your fellow men will not make very desirable neighbors, but you must live with them just the same, for they are your children and you cannot turn them out. You will be unfortunate indeed if you find there no children which were born of love and justice and truth and kindness toward others. In the light of this allegorical suggestion, the subject of accurate thought takes on a new and a much more important aspect, doesn't it? If there is a possibility that every thought you release during this life will step out, in the form of a living being, to greet you after death, then you need no further reason for guarding all your thoughts more carefully than you would guard the food that you feed your physical body. I refer to this suggestion as allegorical, for a reason that you will understand only after you shall have passed through the door of that secret passageway to knowledge that I have heretofore mentioned. To ask me how I know these things before you pass through that door would be as useless as it would be for a man who has never seen with his physical eyes to ask me what the color red looks like. I am not urging you to accept this viewpoint. I am not even arguing its soundness. I am merely fulfilling my duty and discharging my responsibility by giving you the suggestion. You must carry it out to a point at which you can accept or reject it in your own way and of your own volition. The term accurate thought, as used in this lesson, refers to thought which is of your own creation. Thought that comes to you from others through either suggestion or direct statement is not accurate thought within the meaning and purpose of this lesson, although it may be thought that is based upon facts. I have now carried you to the apex of the pyramid of this lesson on accurate thought. I can take you no further. However, you have not gone the entire distance, you have but started. From here on you must be your own guide, but if you have not wholly missed the great truth upon which the lesson is founded, Yarn will not have difficulty in finding your own way. Let me caution you, however, not to become discouraged if the fundamental truth of this lesson does not dawn upon you at first reading. It may require weeks or even months of meditation for you to comprehend fully this truth, but it is worth working for. The principles laid down in the beginning of this lesson you can easily understand and accept because they are of the most elementary nature. However, as you began to follow the chain of thought along toward the close of the lesson, you perhaps found yourself being carried into waters too deep for you to fathom. Perhaps I can throw one final ray of light on the subject by reminding you that the sound of every voice and of every note of music and of every other nature that is being released at the time you are reading these lines is floating through the ether right where you are. To hear these sounds you need but the aid of a modern radio outfit. Without this equipment as a supplement to your own sense of hearing, you are powerless to hear these sounds. Had this same statement been made 20 years ago, you would have believed the one who made it to be insane or a fool. But you now accept the statement without question because you know it is true. Thought is a much higher and more perfectly organized form of energy than is mere sound. Therefore, it is not beyond the bounds of reason to suppose that every thought now being released, and every thought that has ever been released, is also in the ether, or somewhere else, and may be interpreted by those who have the equipment with which to do it. And what sort of equipment is necessary, you ask? That will be answered when you shall have passed through the door that leads to the secret passageway. Some men die too soon from overeating, others die from strong drink, while still others just wither up and die because they have nothing else to do. To knowledge it cannot be answered before. The passageway can be reached only through the medium of your own thoughts. This is one reason why all the great philosophers of the past admonished man to know himself. Know thyself is and has been the cry of the ages. The life of Christ was one uninterrupted promise of hope and possibility based entirely upon the knowledge which all may discover who search within their own beings. One of the unanswerable mysteries of God's work is the fact that this great discovery is always self-discovery. The truth for which man is eternally searching is wrapped up in his own being. Therefore, it is fruitless to search far afield in the wilderness of life or in the hearts of other men to find it. To do so brings you no nearer that which you are seeking, but takes you further away from it, and it may be who knows but you. That even now, as you finish this lesson, you are nearer the door that leads to the secret passageway to knowledge than you have ever been before. With your mastery of this lesson will come a fuller understanding of the principle referred to in the introductory lesson as the master mind. Surely you now understand the reason for friendly cooperative alliance between two or more people. This alliance steps up the minds of those who participate in it and permits them to contact their thought power with infinite intelligence. With this statement, the entire introductory lesson should have a new meaning for you. This lesson has familiarized you with the main reason why you should make use of the law of the master mind, by showing you the height to which this law may be made to carry all who understand and use it. By this time you should understand why a few men have risen to great heights of power and fortune, while others all around them remained in poverty and want. If you do not now understand the cause for this, you will by the time you master the remaining lessons of this course. Do not become discouraged if complete understanding of these principles does not follow your first reading of this lesson. This is the one lesson of the entire course which cannot be fully assimilated by the beginner through one reading. It will give up its rich treasures of knowledge only through thought, reflection, and meditation. For this reason, you are instructed to read this lesson at least 4 times, at intervals of 1 week apart. You are also instructed to read, again, the introductory lesson, that you may more accurately and definitely understand the law of the master mind, and the relationship between this law and the subjects covered by this lesson on accurate thought. The master mind is the principle through which you may become an accurate thinker. Is not this statement both plain and significant? Failure and after the lesson visit with the author the great success lessons that can be learned from reverses. An all-wise providence has arranged the affairs of mankind so that every person who comes into the age of reason must bear the cross of failure in one form or another. You see in the picture at the top of this page, the heaviest and most cruel of all the crosses, poverty. Hundreds of millions of people living on this earth today find it necessary to struggle under the burden of this cross in order to enjoy the 3 bare necessities of life, a place to sleep, something to eat, and clothes to wear. Carrying the cross of poverty is no joke. But it seems significant that the greatest and most successful men and women who ever lived found it necessary to carry this cross before they arrived. Failure is generally accepted as a curse. But few people ever understand that failure is a curse only when it is accepted as such. But few ever learn the truth that failure is seldom permanent. Go back over your own experiences for a few years, and you will see that your failures generally turned out to be blessings in disguise. Failure teaches men lessons which they would never learn without it. Moreover, it teaches in a language that is universal. Among the great lessons taught by failure is that of humility. No man may become great without feeling himself humble and insignificant when compared to the world about him, and the stars above him, and the harmony with which nature does her work. For every rich man's son who becomes a useful, constructive worker in behalf of humanity, there are 99 others rendering useful service who come up through poverty and misery. This seems more than a coincidence. Most people who believe themselves to be failures are not failures at all. Most conditions which people look upon as failure are nothing more than temporary defeat. If you pity yourself and feel that you are a failure, think how much worse off you would be if you had to change places with others who have real cause for complaint. In the city of Chicago lives a beautiful young woman. Her eyes are a light blue, her complexion is extremely fair. She has a sweet, charming voice, she is educated and cultured. 3 days after graduating in one of the colleges of the East, she discovered that she had Negro blood in her veins. The man to whom she was engaged refused to marry her. The Negroes do not want her and the whites will not associate with her. During the remainder of her life, she must bear the brand of permanent failure. Remember, this is permanent failure. As this essay is being written, news comes of a beautiful girl baby who was born to an unwed girl and taken into an orphanage, there to be brought up mechanically, without ever knowing the influence of a mother's love. All through life, this unfortunate child must bear the brunt of another's mistake which can never be corrected. How fortunate are you, no matter what may be your imaginary failures, that you are not this child. If you have a strong body and a sound mind, you have much for which you ought to be thankful. Millions of people all about you have no such blessings. Careful analysis of 100 men and women whom the world has accepted as being great shows that they were compelled to undergo hardship and temporary defeat, and failure such as you probably have never known and never will know. Woodrow Wilson went to his grave altogether too soon, the victim of cruel slander and disappointment, believing no doubt that he was a failure. Time, the great miracle worker that rights all wrongs and turns failure into success, will place the name of Woodrow Wilson at the top of the page of the really great. Few now living have the vision to see that out of Wilson's failure will come, eventually, such a powerful demand for universal peace that war will be an impossibility. Lincoln died without knowing that his failure gave sound foundation to the greatest nation on this earth. Columbus died a prisoner in chains without ever knowing that his failure meant the discovery of the great nation which Lincoln and Wilson helped to preserve with their failures. Do not use the word failure carelessly. Remember, carrying a burdensome cross temporarily is not failure. If you have the real seed of success within you, a little adversity and temporary defeat will only serve to nurture that seed and cause it to burst forth into maturity. When divine intelligence wants a great man or woman to render some needed service in the world, the fortunate one is tested out through some form of failure. If you are undergoing what you believe to be failure, have patience. You may be passing through your testing time. No capable executive would select as his lieutenants those whom he had not tested for reliability, loyalty, perseverance, and other essential qualities. Responsibility, and all that goes with it in the way of remuneration, always gravitates to the person who will not accept temporary defeat as permanent failure. The test of a man is the fight he makes, the grit that he daily shows, the way he stands on his feet and takes fate's numerous bumps and blows. A coward can smile when there's naught to fear, when nothing his progress bars. But it takes a man to stand up and cheer while some other fellow stars. It isn't the victory after all, but the fight that a brother makes. The man who, driven against the wall, still stands up erect and takes the blows of fate with his head held high. Bleeding and bruised and pale is the man who will win in the by and by, for he isn't afraid to fail. It's the bumps you get and the jolts you get and the shocks that your courage stands, the hours of sorrow and vain regret, the prize that escapes your hands that test your mettle and prove your worth. It isn't the blows you deal, but the blows you take on the good old earth that show if your stuff is real. Failure often places one in a position where unusual effort must be forthcoming. Many a man has wrung victory from defeat, fighting with his back to the wall where he could not retreat. Caesar had long wished to conquer the British. He quietly sailed his soldier-laden ships to the British island, unloaded his troops and supplies, then gave the order to burn all the ships. Calling his soldiers about him, he said, "Now it is win or perish, we have no choice." They won. Men usually win when they make up their minds to do so. Burn your bridges behind you and observe how well you work when you know that you have no retreat. A streetcar conductor got a leave of absence while he tried out a position in a great mercantile business. "If I do not succeed in holding my new position," he remarked to a friend, "I can always come back to the old job." At the end of the month, he was back, completely cured of all ambition to do anything except work on a streetcar. Had he resigned instead of asking for a leave of absence, he might have made good in the new job. The 13 Club movement, which is now spreading over the entire country, was born as the result of a shocking disappointment experienced by its founder. That shock was sufficient to open the mind to a broader and more comprehensive view of the needs of the age, and this discovery led to the creation of one of the most outstanding influences of this generation. The 15 laws of success, upon which this course is based, grew out of 20 years of hardship and poverty and failure, such as rarely come to one person in an entire lifetime. Surely those of you who have followed this series of lessons from the beginning must have read between the lines and back of them a story of struggle which has meant self-discipline and self-discovery, such as never would have been known without this hardship. Study the roadway of life in the picture at the beginning of this essay, and observe that everyone who travels that road carries a cross. Remember, as you take inventory of your own burdens, that nature's richest gifts go to those who meet failure without flinching or whining. Nature's ways are not easily understood. If they were, no one could be tested for great responsibility with failure. When nature wants to make a man and shake a man and wake a man, when nature wants to make a man to do the future's will, when she tries with all her skill and she yearns with all her soul to create him large and whole. With what cunning she prepares him, how she goads and never spares him, how she wets him and she frets him and in poverty begets him. How she often disappoints, how she often anoints, with what wisdom she will hide him, never minding what betide him, though his genius sob with slighting and his pride may not forget, bids him struggle harder yet. Makes him lonely so that only God's high messages shall reach him, so that she may surely teach him what the hierarchy planned, though he may not understand, gives him passions to command. How remorselessly she spurs him, with terrific ardor stirs him when she poignantly prefers him. Lo, the crisis, lo, the shout that must call the leader out. When the people need salvation, doth he come to lead the nation. Then doth nature show her plan when the world has found a man. There is no failure. That which looks failure is usually nothing but temporary defeat, sure that you do not accept it as permanent. To be make in 16 lessons teaching, for the first time in the history of the world, the true philosophy upon which all personal success is built. BY Lesson 12 Concentration. There is a sure way to avoid criticism. Be nothing and do nothing. Get a job as a street sweeper and kill off ambition. The remedy never fails. Lesson 12 Concentration. You can do it if you believe you can. This lesson occupies a keystone position in this course, for the reason that the psychological law upon which it is based is of vital importance to every other lesson of the course. Let us define the word concentration, as it is here used, as follows. Concentration is the act of focusing the mind upon a given desire until ways and means for its realization have been worked out and successfully put into operation. Two important laws enter into the act of concentrating the mind on a given desire. One is the law of autosuggestion, and the other is the law of habit. The former having been fully described in a previous lesson of this course, we will now briefly describe the law of habit. Habit grows out of environment, out of doing the same thing in the same way over and over again, out of repetition, out of thinking the same thoughts over and over, and, when once formed, it resembles a cement block that has hardened in the mold, in that it is hard to break. Habit is the basis of all memory training, a fact which you may easily demonstrate in remembering the name of a person whom you have just met, by repeating that name over and over until you have fixed it permanently and plainly in your mind. The force of education is so great that we may mold the minds and manners of the young into whatever shape we please, and give the impressions of such habits as shall ever afterwards remain. Udderberry. Except on rare occasions when the mind rises above environment, the human mind draws the material out of which thought is created, from the surrounding environment, and habit crystallizes this thought into a permanent fixture and stores it away in the subconscious mind, where it becomes a vital part of our personality which silently influences our actions, forms our prejudices and our biases, and controls our opinions. A great philosopher had in mind the power of habit when he said, "We first endure, then pity, and finally embrace," in speaking of the manner in which honest men come to indulge in crime. Habit may be likened to the grooves on a phonograph record, while the mind may be likened to the needle point that fits into that groove. When any habit has been well formed, by repetition of thought or action, the mind attaches itself to and follows that habit as closely as the phonograph needle follows the groove in the wax record, no matter what may be the nature of that habit. We begin to see, therefore, the importance of selecting our environment with the greatest of care, because environment is the mental feeding ground out of which the food that goes into our minds is extracted. Environment very largely supplies the food and materials out of which we create thought, and habit crystallizes these into permanency. You of course understand that environment is the sum total of sources through which you are influenced by and through the aid of the five senses of seeing, hearing, smelling, tasting, and feeling. Habit is force which is generally recognized by the average thinking person, but which is commonly viewed in its adverse aspect to the exclusion of its favorable phase. It has been well said that all men are the creatures of habit, and that habit is a cable. We weave a thread of it each day, and it becomes so strong that we cannot break it. If it be true that habit becomes a cruel tyrant, ruling and compelling men against their will, desire, and inclination, and this is true in many cases, the question naturally arises in the thinking mind whether this mighty force cannot be harnessed and controlled in the service of men, just as have other forces of nature. If this result can be accomplished, then man may master habit and set it to work, instead of being a slave to it and serving it faithfully though complainings. And the modern psychologists tell us in no uncertain tones that habit may certainly be thus mastered, harnessed, and set to work, instead of being allowed to dominate one's actions and character. And thousands of people have applied this new knowledge and have turned the force of habit into new channels, and have compelled it to work their machinery of action, instead of being allowed to run to waste, or else permitted to sweep away the structures that men have erected with care and expense, or to destroy fertile mental fields. A habit is a mental pathway over which our actions have traveled for some time, each passing making the path a little deeper and a little wider. If you have to walk over a field or through a forest, You know how natural it is for you to choose the clearest path in preference to the less worn ones, and greatly in preference to stepping out across the field or through the woods and making a new path. And the line of mental action is precisely the same. It is movement along the lines of least resistance passage over the well-worn path. Habits are created by repetition and are formed in accordance to a natural law, observable in all animate things, and some would say in inanimate things as well. As an instance of the latter, it is pointed out that a piece of paper once folded in a certain way will fold along the same lines the next time. And all users of sewing machines or other delicate pieces of machinery know that as a machine or instrument is once broken in 5, so will it tend to run thereafter. The same law is also observable in the case of musical instruments. Clothing or gloves form into creases according to the person using them, and these creases once formed will always be in effect, notwithstanding repeated pressings. Rivers and streams of water cut their courses through the land, and thereafter flow along the habit course. The law is in operation everywhere. These illustrations will help you to form the idea of the nature of habit, and will aid you in forming new mental paths, new mental creases. And remember this always, the best, and one might say the only, way in which old habits may be removed, is to form new habits to counteract and replace the undesirable ones. Form new mental paths over which to travel, and the old ones will soon become less distinct, and in time will practically fill up from disuse. Every time you travel over the path of the desirable mental habit, you make the path deeper and wider, and make it so much easier to travel it thereafter. This mental path-making is a very important thing, and I cannot urge upon you too strongly the injunction to start to work making the desirable mental paths over which you wish to travel. Practice, 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 be a good path maker. The following are the rules of procedure through which you may form the habits you desire. First, at the beginning of the formation of a new habit, put force and enthusiasm into your expression. Feel what you think. Remember that you are taking the first steps toward making the new mental path, that it is much harder at first than it will be afterwards. Make the path as clear and as deep as you can at the beginning so that you can readily see it the next time you wish to follow it. Second, keep your attention firmly concentrated on the new path building and keep your mind away from the old paths lest you incline toward them. Forget all about the old paths and concern yourself only with the new ones that you are building to order. Third, travel over your newly made paths as often as possible. Make opportunities for doing so. It is a striking coincidence that American ends with "I can," without waiting for them to arise through luck or chance. The oftener you go over the new paths, the sooner will they become well-worn and easily traveled. Create plans for passing over these new habit paths at the very start. Fourth, resist the temptation to travel over the older, easier paths that you have been using in the past. Every time you resist a temptation, the stronger do you become, and the easier will it be for you to do so the next time. But every time you yield to the temptation, the easier does it become to yield again, and the more difficult it becomes to resist the next time. You will have a fight on at the start, and this is the critical time. Prove your determination, persistency, and willpower now at the very beginning. Fifth, be sure that you have mapped out the right path as your definite chief aim, and then go ahead without fear and without allowing yourself to doubt. Place your hand upon the plow and look not backward. Select your goal, then make good, deep, wide mental paths leading straight to it. As you have already observed, there is a close relationship between habit and autosuggestion, self-suggestion. Through habit, an act repeatedly performed in the same manner has a tendency to become permanent, and eventually we come to perform the act automatically or unconsciously. In playing a piano, for example, the artist can play a familiar piece while his or her conscious mind is on some other subject. Autosuggestion is the tool with which we dig a mental path. Concentration is the hand that holds that tool, and habit is the map or blueprint which the mental path follows. An idea or desire to be transformed into terms of action or physical reality must be held in the conscious mind faithfully and persistently until habit begins to give it permanent form. Let us turn our attention now to environment. As we have already seen, we absorb the material for thought from our surrounding environment. The term environment covers a very broad field. It consists of the books we read, the people with whom we associate, the community in which we live, the nature of the work in which we are engaged, the country or nation in which we reside, the clothes we wear, the songs we sing, and most important of all, the religious and intellectual training we receive prior to the age of 14 years. The purpose of analyzing the subject of environment is to show its direct relationship to the personality we are developing, and the importance of so guarding it that its influence will give us the materials out of which we may attain our definite chief aim in life. The mind feeds upon that which we supply it, or that which is forced upon it, through our environment. Therefore, let us select our environment, as far as possible, with the object of supplying the mind with suitable material out of which to carry on its work of attaining our definite chief aim. If your environment is not to your liking, change it. The first step is to create in your own mind an exact, clear, and well-rounded out picture of the environment in which you believe you could best attain your definite chief aim, and then concentrate your mind upon this picture until you transform it into reality. In Lesson 2 of this course, you learn that the first step you must take in the accomplishment of any desire is to create in your mind a dear, well-defined picture of that which you intend to accomplish. This is the first principle to be observed in your plans for the achievement of success, and if you fail or neglect to observe it, you cannot succeed, except by chance. Your daily associates constitute one of the most important and influential parts of your environment, and may work for your progress or your retrogression, according to the nature of those associates. As far as possible, you should select as your most intimate daily associates those who are in sympathy with your aims and ideals, especially those represented by your definite chief aim, and whose mental attitude inspires you with enthusiasm, self-confidence, determination, and ambition. Remember that every word spoken within your hearing, every sight that reaches your eyes, and every sense impression that you receive through any of the 5 senses influences your thought as surely as the sun rises in the east and sets in the west. This being true, can you not see the importance of controlling, as far as possible, the environment in which you live and work? Can you not see the importance of reading books that deal with subjects which are directly related to your definite chief aim? Can you not see the importance of talking with people who are in sympathy with your aims, and who will encourage you and spur you on toward their attainment? We are living in what we call a 20th century civilization. The leading scientists of the world are agreed that nature has been millions of years in creating, through the process of evolution, our present civilized environment. How many hundreds of centuries the so-called Indians had lived upon the North American continent, without any appreciable advance toward modern civilization, as we understand it, we have no way of ascertaining. Their environment was the wilderness, and they made no attempt whatsoever to change or improve that environment. The change took place only after new races from afar came over and forced upon them the environment of progressive civilization in which we are living today. Observe what has happened within the short period of 3 centuries. Hunting grounds have been transformed into great cities, and the Indian has taken on education and culture, in many instances, that equal the accomplishment of his white brothers. In Lesson 15, we discuss the effects of environment from a worldwide viewpoint, and describe, in detail, the principle of social heredity, which is the chief source through which the effects of environment may be imposed upon the minds of the young. The clothes you wear influence you. Therefore, they constitute a part of your environment. Soiled or shabby clothes depress you and lower your self-confidence, while clean clothes of an appropriate style have just the opposite effect. It is a well-known fact that an observant person can accurately analyze a man by seeing his workbench, desk, or other place of employment. A well-organized desk indicates a well-organized brain. Show me the merchant's stock of goods, and I will tell you whether he has an organized or disorganized brain, as there is a close relationship between one's mental attitude and one's physical environment. The effects of environment so vitally influence those who work in factories, stores, and offices that employers are gradually realizing the importance of creating an environment that inspires and encourages the workers. One unusually progressive laundryman in the city of Chicago has plainly outdone his competitors by installing in his workroom a player piano, in charge of a neatly dressed young woman who keeps it going during the working hours. His laundrywomen are dressed in white uniforms, and there is no evidence about the place that work is drudgery. Through the aid of this pleasant environment, this laundryman turns out more work, earns more profits, and pays better wages than his competitors can pay. This brings us to an appropriate place at which to describe the method through which you may apply the principles directly and indirectly related to the subject of concentration. Let us call this method the magic key to success. In presenting you with this magic key, let me first explain that it is no invention or discovery of mine. It is the same key that is used, in one form or another, by the followers of New Thought and all other sects which are founded upon the positive philosophy of optimism. This magic key constitutes an irresistible power which all who will may use. The person who receives no pay for his services except that which comes in the pay envelope is underpaid, no matter how much money that envelope may contain. It will unlock the door to riches. It will unlock the door to fame. And in many instances, it will unlock the door to physical health. It will unlock the door to education and let you into the storehouse of all your latent ability. It will act as a passkey to any position in life for which you are fitted. Through the aid of this magic key, we have unlocked the secret doors to all of the world's great inventions. Through its magic powers, all of our great geniuses of the past have been developed. Suppose you are a laborer in a menial position and desire a better place in life. The magic key will help you attain it. Through its use, Carnegie, Rockefeller, Hill, Harriman, Morgan, and scores of others of their type have accumulated vast fortunes of material wealth. It will unlock prison doors and turn human derelicts into useful, trustworthy human beings. It will turn failure into success and misery into happiness. You ask, what is this magic key? And I answer with one word: concentration. Now let me define concentration in the sense that it is here used. First, I wish it to be clearly understood that I have no reference to occultism, although I will admit that all the scientists of the world have failed to explain the strange phenomena produced through the aid of concentration. Concentration, in the sense in which it is here used, means the ability, through fixed habit and practice, to keep your mind on one subject until you have thoroughly familiarized yourself with that subject and mastered it. It means the ability to control your attention and focus it on a given problem until you have solved it. It means the ability to throw off the effects of habits which you wish to discard and the power to build new habits that are more to your liking. It means complete self-mastery. Stating it in another way, concentration is the ability to think as you wish to think, the ability to control your thoughts and direct them to a definite end, and the ability to organize your knowledge into a plan of action that is sound and workable. You can readily see that in concentrating your mind upon your definite chief aim in life, you must cover many closely related subjects which blend into each other and complete the main subject upon which you are concentrating. Ambition and desire are the chief factors which enter into the act of successful concentration. Without these factors, the magic key is useless, and the main reason why so few people make use of this key is that most people lack ambition and desire nothing in particular. Desire whatever you may, and if your desire is within reason, and if it is strong enough, the magic key of concentration will help you attain it. There are learned men of science who would have us believe that the wonderful power of prayer operates through the principle of concentration on the attainment of a deeply seated desire. Nothing was ever created by a human being which was not first created in the imagination, through desire, and then transformed into reality through concentration. Now let us put the magic key to a test through the aid of a definite formula. First, you must put your foot on the neck of skepticism and doubt. No unbeliever ever enjoyed the benefits of this magic key. You must believe in the test that you are about to make. We will assume that you have thought something about becoming a successful writer, or a powerful public speaker, or a successful business executive, or an able financier. We will take public speaking as the subject of this test, but remember that you must follow instructions to the letter. Take a plain sheet of paper, ordinary letter size, and write on it the following: I am going to become a powerful public speaker, because this will enable me to render the world useful service that is needed, and because it will yield me a financial return that will provide me with the necessary material things of life. I will concentrate my mind upon this desire for 10 minutes daily, just before retiring at night and just after arising in the morning, for the purpose of determining just how I shall proceed to transform it into reality. I know that I can become a powerful and magnetic speaker, therefore I will permit nothing to interfere with my doing so. Signed. Sign this pledge, then proceed to do as you have pledged your word that you would do. Keep it up until the desired results have been realized. Now, when you come to do your concentrating, this is the way to go about it. Look ahead 1, 3, 5, or even 10 years and see yourself as the most powerful speaker of your time. See in your imagination an appropriate income. See yourself in your own home that you have purchased with the proceeds from your efforts as a speaker or lecturer. See yourself in possession of a nice bank account as a reserve for old age. See yourself as a person of influence due to your great ability as a public speaker. See yourself engaged in a life calling in which you will not fear the loss of your position. Paint this picture clearly through the powers of your imagination, and lo, it will soon become transformed into a beautiful picture of deeply seated desire. Use this desire as the chief object of your concentration and observe what happens. You now have the secret of the magic key. Do not underestimate the power of the magic key because it did not come to you clothed in mysticism, or because it is described in language which all who will may understand. All great truths are simple in final analysis and easily understood. If they are not great truths. Use this magic key with intelligence and only for the attainment of worthy ends, and it will bring you enduring happiness and success. Forget the mistakes you have made and the failures you have experienced. Quit living in the past, for do you not know that your yesterdays never return? Start all over again if your previous efforts have not turned out well, and make the next 5 or 10 years tell a story of success that will satisfy your most lofty ambitions. Make a name for yourself and render the world a great service through ambition, desire, and concentrated effort. You can do it if you believe you can. Thus endeth the magic key. The presence of any idea or thought in your consciousness tends to produce an associated feeling and to urge you to appropriate or corresponding action. Hold a deeply seated desire in your consciousness through the principle of concentration, and if you do it with full faith in its realization, your act attracts to your aid powers which the entire scientific world has failed to understand or explain with a reasonable hypothesis. When you become familiar with the powers of concentration, you will then understand the reason for choosing a definite chief aim as the first step in the attainment of enduring success. Concentrate your mind upon the attainment of the object of a deeply seated desire, and very soon you will become a lodestone that attracts, through the aid of forces which no man can explain, the necessary material counterparts of that desire, a statement of fact which paves the way for the description of a principle which constitutes the most important part of this lesson. When 2 or more people ally themselves in a spirit of perfect harmony for the purpose of attaining a definite end, if that alliance is faithfully observed by all of whom it is composed, the alliance brings to each of those of whom it is composed power that is superhuman and seemingly irresistible in nature. Back of the foregoing statement is a law, the nature of which science has not yet determined, and it is this law that I have had in mind in connection with my repeated statements concerning the power of organized effort which you will notice throughout this course. In chemistry, we learn that 2 or more elements may be so compounded that the result is something entirely different in nature from any of the individual elements. For example, ordinary water, known in chemistry under the formula of H2O, is a compound consisting of 2 atoms of hydrogen and 1 atom of oxygen, but water is neither hydrogen nor oxygen. This marrying of elements creates an entirely different substance from that of either of its component parts. The same law through which this transformation of physical elements takes place may be responsible for the seemingly superhuman powers resulting from the alliance of 2 or more people, in a perfect state of harmony and understanding, for the attainment of a given end. This world and all matter of which the other planets consist is made up of electrons, an electron being the smallest known analyzable unit of matter, and resembling in nature what we call electricity or a form of energy. On the other hand, thought and that which we call the mind is also a form of energy. In fact, it is the highest form of energy known. Thought, in other words, is organized energy, and it is not improbable that thought is exactly the same sort of energy as that which we generate with an electric dynamo, although of a much more highly organized form. Now, if all matter in final analysis consists of groups of electrons, which are nothing more than a form of energy which we call electricity, and if the mind is nothing but a form of highly organized electricity, do you not see how it is possible that the laws which affect matter may also govern the mind? And if combining 2 or more elements of matter in the proper proportion and under the right conditions will produce something entirely different from those original elements, as in the case of H2O, do you not see how it is possible so to combine the energy of 2 or more minds that the result will be a sort of composite mind that is totally different from the individual minds of which it consists? You have undoubtedly noticed the manner in which you are influenced while in the presence of other people. Some people inspire you with optimism and enthusiasm. Their very presence seems to stimulate your own mind to greater action, and this not only seems to be true, but it is true. You have noticed that the presence of others had a tendency to lower your vitality and depress you, a tendency which I can assure you was very real. What do you imagine could be the cause of these changes that come over us when we come within a certain range of other people, unless it is the change resulting from the blending or combining of their minds with our own, through the operation of a law that is not very well understood, but resembles, if in fact it is not the same law, the law through which the combining of 2 atoms of hydrogen and 1 atom of oxygen produces water. I have no scientific basis for this hypothesis, but I have given it many years of serious thought, and always I come to the conclusion that it is at least a sound hypothesis, although I have no possible way, as yet, of reducing it to a provable hypothesis. You need no proof, however, that the presence of some people inspires you, while the presence of others depresses you, as you know this to be a fact. Now it stands to reason that the person who inspires you and arouses your mind to a state of greater activity gives you more power to achieve, while the person whose presence depresses you and lowers your vitality, or causes you to dissipate it in useless, disorganized thought, has just the opposite effect on you. You can understand this much without the aid of a hypothesis, and without further proof than that which you have experienced time after time. Come back now to the original statement that, when two or more people ally themselves in a spirit of perfect harmony for the purpose of attaining a definite end, if that alliance is faithfully observed by all of whom it is composed, the alliance brings to each of those of whom it is composed power that is superhuman and seemingly irresistible in nature. Study closely the emphasized part of the foregoing statement, for there you will find the mental formula which, if not faithfully observed, destroys the effect of the whole. One atom of hydrogen combined with one atom of oxygen will not produce water, nor will an alliance in name only, that is not accompanied by a spirit of perfect harmony between those forming the alliance, produce power that is superhuman and seemingly irresistible in nature. I have in mind a family of mountain folk who, for more than 6 generations, have lived in the mountainous section of Kentucky. Generation after generation of this family came and went without any noticeable improvement of a mental nature, each generation following in the footsteps of its ancestors. They made their living from the soil, and as far as they knew or cared, the universe consisted of a little spot of territory known as Letcher County. They married strictly in their own set and in their own community. Finally, one of the members of this family strayed away from the flock, so to speak, and married a well-educated and highly cultured woman from the neighbor state of Virginia. This woman was one of those types of ambitious people who had learned that the universe extended beyond the border line of Letcher County, and covered at least the whole of the southern states. She had heard of chemistry and of botany and of biology and of pathology and of psychology and of many other subjects that were of importance in the field of education. When her children began to come along to the age of understanding, she talked to them of these subjects, and they, in turn, began to show a keen interest in them. One of her children is now the president of a great educational institution where most of these subjects and many others of equal importance are taught. Another one of them is a prominent lawyer, while still another is a successful physician. Her husband, thanks to the influence of her mind, is a well-known dental surgeon, and the first of his family, for 6 generations, to break away from the traditions by which the family had been bound. The blending of her mind with his gave him the needed stimulus to spur him on, and inspired him with ambition such as he would never have known without her influence. For many years I have been studying the biographies of those whom the world calls great, and it seems to me more than a mere coincidence that in every instance where the facts were available, the person who was really responsible for the greatness was in the background, behind the scenes, and seldom heard of by the hero-worshipping public. Not infrequently is this hidden power a patient little wife who has inspired her husband and urged him on to great achievement, as was true in the case I have just described. Henry Ford is one of the modem miracles of this age, and I doubt that this country, or any other, ever produced an industrial genius of his equal. If the facts were known, and perhaps they are known, they might trace the cause of Mr. Ford's phenomenal achievements to a woman of whom the public hears but little, his wife. We read of Ford's achievements and of his enormous income, and imagine him to be blessed with matchless ability, and he is ability of which the world would never have heard had it not been for the modifying influence of his wife, who has cooperated defeat like a headache. Warns us that something has gone wrong. If we are intelligent, we look for the cause and profit by the experience. With him, during all the years of his struggle, in a spirit of perfect harmony, for the purpose of attaining a definite end, I have in mind another genius who is well known to the entire civilized world, Thomas A. Edison. His inventions are so well known that they need not be named. Every time you press a button and turn on an electric light or hear a phonograph playing, you should think of Edison, for it was he who perfected both the incandescent light and the modem phonograph. Every time you see a moving picture, you should think of Edison, for it was his genius, more than that of any other person, who made this great enterprise possible. But as in the case of Henry Ford, back of Mr. Edison stands one of the most remarkable women in America, his wife. No one outside of the Edison family, and perhaps a very few intimate personal friends of theirs, knows to what extent her influence has made Edison's achievements possible. Mrs. Edison once told me that Mr. Edison's outstanding quality, the one which, above all others, was his greatest asset, was that of concentration. When Mr. Edison starts a line of experiment or research or investigation, he never lets go until he either finds that for which he is looking or exhausts every possible effort to do so. Back of Mr. Edison stand two great powers. One is concentration and the other is Mrs. Edison. Night after night, Mr. Edison has worked with such enthusiasm that he required but 3 or 4 hours of sleep. Observe what was said about the sustaining effects of enthusiasm in Lesson 7 of this course. Plant a tiny apple seed in the right sort of soil at the right time of the year, and gradually it will burst forth into a tiny sprig, and then it will expand and grow into an apple tree. That tree does not come from the soil, nor does it come from the elements of the air, but from both of these sources, and the man has not yet lived who could explain the law that attracts from the air, and the soil the combination of cells of which that apple tree consists. The tree does not come out of the tiny apple seed, but that seed is the beginning of the tree. When 2 or more people ally themselves, in a spirit of perfect harmony, for the purpose of attaining a definite end, the end itself, or the desire back of that end, may be likened to the apple seed, and the blending of the forces of energy of the 2 or more minds may be likened to the air, and the soil out of which come the elements that form the material objects of that desire. The power back of the attraction and combination of these forces of the mind can no more be explained than can the power back of the combination of elements out of which an apple tree grows. But the all-important thing is that an apple tree will grow from a seed thus properly planted, and great achievement will follow the systematic blending of 2 or more minds with a definite object in view. In Lesson 13, you will see this principle of allied effort carried to proportions, which almost stagger the imagination of all who have not trained themselves to think in terms of organized thought. This course itself is a very concrete illustration of the principle underlying that which we have termed organized effort, but you will observe that it requires the entire 16 lessons to complete the description of this principle. Omit a single one of the 16 lessons, and the omission would affect the whole as the removal of one link would affect the whole of a chain. As I have already stated in many different ways, and for the purpose of emphasis, I now repeat. There is a well-founded hypothesis that when one concentrates one's mind upon a given subject, facts of a nature that is closely related to that subject will pour in from every conceivable source. The theory is that a deeply seated desire, when once planted in the right sort of mental soil, serves as a center of attraction or magnet that attracts to it everything that harmonizes with the nature of the desire. Dr. Elmer Gates of Washington, D.C., is perhaps one of the most competent psychologists in the world. He is recognized both in the field of psychology and in other directly and indirectly related fields of science throughout the world as being a man of the highest scientific standing. Come with me for a moment and study his methods. After Dr. Gates has followed a line of investigation as far as possible through the usual channels of research, and has availed himself of all the recorded facts at his command on a given subject, he then takes a pencil and a tablet and sits for further information, by concentrating his mind on that subject until thoughts related to it begin to flow in upon him. He writes down these thoughts as they come from he knows not where. He told me that many of his most important discoveries came through this method. It was more than 20 years ago that I first talked with Dr. Gates on this subject. Since that time, through the discovery of the radio principle, we have been provided with a reasonable hypothesis through which to explain the results of these sittings, viz. The ether, as we have discovered through the modern radio apparatus, is in a constant state of agitation. Sound waves are floating through the ether at all times, but these waves cannot be detected beyond a short distance from their source, except by the aid of properly attuned instruments. Now it seems reasonable to suppose that thought, being the most highly organized form of energy known, is constantly sending waves through the ether, but these waves, like those of sound, can only be detected and correctly interpreted by a properly attuned mind. There is no doubt that when Dr. Gates sat down in a room and placed himself in a quiet, passive state of mind, the dominating thoughts in his mind served as a magnetic force that attracted the related or similar thought waves of others as they passed through the ether about him. Taking the hypothesis just a step further, it has occurred to me many times since the discovery of the modern radio principle that every thought that has ever been released in organized form from the mind of any human being is still in existence in the form of a wave in the ether and is constantly passing around and around in a great endless circle. That the act of concentrating one's mind upon a given subject with intensity sends out thought waves which reach and blend with those of a related or similar nature, thereby establishing a direct line of communication between the one doing the concentrating and the thoughts of a similar nature which have been previously set into motion. Going still a step further, may it not be possible for one so to attune his mind and harmonize the rate of vibration of thought with the rate of vibration of the ether, that all knowledge that has been accumulated through the organized thoughts of the past is available. With these hypotheses in mind, go back to Lesson 2 of this course and study Carnegie's description of the master mind through which he accumulated his great fortune. When Carnegie formed an alliance between more than a score of carefully selected minds, he created, by that means of compounding mind power, one of the strongest industrial forces that the world has ever witnessed. With a few notable and very disastrous exceptions, the men constituting the master mind, which Carnegie created, thought and acted as one. And that master mind, composed of many individual minds, was concentrated upon a single purpose, the nature of which is familiar to everyone who knew Mr. Carnegie, particularly those who were competing with him in the steel business. If you have followed Henry Ford's record, even slightly, you undoubtedly have observed that concentrated effort has been one of the outstanding features of his career. Nearly 30 years ago he adopted a policy of standardization. As to the general, is it not strange that the word boomerang has been in the dictionary all these years, without its having become generally known that a boomerang is an instrument which comes back and may wound the hand that throws it. Type of automobile that he would build, and he consistently maintained that policy until the change in public demand forced him, in 192.7, to change it. A few years ago I met the former chief engineer of the Ford plant, and he told me of an incident that happened during the early stages of Mr. Ford's automobile experience, which very clearly points to concentrated effort as being one of his prominent fundamentals of economic philosophy. On this occasion, the engineers of the Ford plant had gathered in the engineering office for the purpose of discussing a proposed change in the design of the rear axle construction of the Ford automobile. Mr. Ford stood around and listened to the discussion until each man had had his say. Then he walked over to the table, tapped the drawing of the proposed axle with his finger, and said, "Now listen. The axle we are using does the work for which it was intended, and does it well, and there's going to be no more change in that axle." He turned and walked away, and from that day until this, the rear axle construction of the Ford automobile has remained substantially the same. It is not improbable that Mr. Ford's success in building and marketing automobiles has been due, very largely, to his policy of consistently concentrating his efforts back of one plan, with but one definite purpose in mind at a time. A few years ago I read Edward Bach's book, The Man from Maine, which is the biography of his father-in-law, Mr. Cyrus H.K. Curtis, the owner of the Saturday Evening Post, the Ladies' Home Journal, and several other publications. All through the book I noticed that the outstanding feature of Mr. Curtis' philosophy was that of concentration of effort back of a definite purpose. During the early days of his ownership of the Saturday Evening Post, when he was pouring money into a losing venture by the hundreds of thousands of dollars, it required concentrated effort that was backed by courage such as but few men possess to enable him to carry on. Read The Man from Maine. It is a splendid lesson on the subject of concentration, and supports to the smallest detail the fundamentals upon which this lesson is based. The Saturday Evening Post is now one of the most profitable magazines in the world, but its name would have been long since forgotten had not Mr. Curtis concentrated his attention and his fortune on the one definite purpose of making it a great magazine. We have seen what an important part environment and habit play in connection with the subject of concentration. We shall now discuss, briefly, a third subject which is no less related to the subject of concentration than are the other two, namely memory. The principles through which an accurate, unfaltering memory may be trained are few and comparatively simple, viz., retention, the receiving of a sense impression through one or more of the five senses, and the recording of this impression in orderly fashion in the mind. This process may be likened to the recording of S-picture on the sensitized plate of a camera or codec. Recall, the reviving or recalling into the conscious mind of those sense impressions which have been recorded in the subconscious mind. This process may be compared to the act of going through a card index and pulling out a card on which information had been previously recorded. Recognition, the ability to recognize a sense impression when it is called into the conscious mind, and to identify it as being a duplicate of the original impression, and to associate it with the original source from which it came when it was first recorded. This process enables us to distinguish between memory and imagination. These are the three principles that enter into the act of remembering. Now let us make application of these principles and determine how to use them effectively, which may be done as follows. First, when you wish to be sure of your ability to recall a sense impression, such as a name, date, or place, be sure to make the impression vivid by concentrating your attention upon it to the finest detail. An effective way to do this is to repeat several times that which you wish to remember. Just as a photographer must give an exposure proper time to record itself on the sensitized plate of the camera, so must we give the subconscious mind time to record properly and clearly any sense impression that we wish to be able to recall with readiness. Second, associate that which you wish to remember with some other object, name, place, or date with which you are quite familiar and which you can easily recall when you wish, as for example, the name of your hometown, your close friend, the date of your birth. And so on, for your mind will then file away the sense impression that you wish to be able to recall with the one that you can easily recall, so that when bringing forth one into the conscious mind it brings also the other one with it. Third, repeat that which you wish to remember a number of times at the same time concentrating your mind upon it, just as you would fix your mind on a certain hour at which you wish to arise in the morning, which, as you know, ensures your awakening at that precise hour. The common failing of not being able to remember the names of other people, which most of us have, is due entirely to the fact that we do not properly record the name in the first place. When you are introduced to a person whose name you wish to be able to recall at will, repeat that name 4 or 5 times, first making sure that you understood the name correctly. If the name is similar to that of some person whom you know well, associate the two names together, thinking of both as you repeat the name of the one whose name you wish to be able to recall. If someone gives you a letter to be mailed, look at the letter, then increase its size in your imagination and see it hanging over a letterbox. Fix in your mind a letter approximately the size of a door and associate it with a letter box, and you will observe that the first letter box you pass on the street will cause you to recall that big, odd-looking letter which you have in your pocket. Suppose that you were introduced to a lady whose name was Elizabeth Scherer, and you wish to be able to recall her name at will. As you repeat her name, associate with it a large pair of scissors, say 10 feet in length, and Queen Elizabeth, and you will observe that the recalling of either the large pair of scissors or the name of Queen Elizabeth will help you recall, also, the name of Elizabeth Scherer. If you wish to be able to remember the name of Lloyd Keith, just repeat the name several times and associate with it the name of Lloyd George and Keith's Theatre, either of which you can easily recall at will. The law of association is the most important feature of a well-trained memory, yet it is a very simple law. All you have to do to make use of it is to record the name of that which you wish to remember with the name of that which you can readily remember, and the recalling of one brings with it the other. Nearly 10 years ago, a friend gave me his residence telephone number in Milwaukee, Wisconsin, and although I did not write it down, I remember it today as well as I did the day he gave it to me. This is the way that I recorded it. The number and exchange were Lakeview. At the time he gave me the number, we were standing at the railroad station in sight of Lake Michigan. Therefore, I used the lake as an associated object with which to file the name of the telephone exchange. It so happened that the telephone number was made up of the age of my brother, who was 26, and my father, who was 51. Therefore, I associated their names with the number, thus ensuring its recall. To recall the telephone exchange and number, therefore, I had only to think of Lake Michigan, my brother, and my father. An acquaintance of mine found himself to be suffering from what is ordinarily called a wandering, do you see that lucky fellow over there who holds a position through pull. Let me whisper a secret in your ear. Fate is standing in wait for him just around the corner with a stuffed club, and it is not stuffed with cotton. Mind, he was becoming absent-minded and unable to remember. Let him tell you in his own words which follow how he overcame this handicap. I am 50 years old. For a decade, I have been a department manager in a large factory. At first, my duties were easy. Then the firm had a rapid expansion of business which gave me added responsibilities. Several of the young men in my department developed unusual energy and ability. At least one of them had his eye on my job. I had reached the age in life when a man likes to be comfortable, and having been with the company a long time, I felt that I could safely settle back into an easy berth. The effect of this mental attitude was well nigh disastrous to my position. About 2 years ago, I noticed that my power of concentration was weakening and my duties were becoming irksome. I neglected my correspondence until I looked with dread upon the formidable pile of letters. Reports accumulated, and subordinates were inconvenienced by the delay. I sat at my desk with my mind wandering elsewhere. Other circumstances showed plainly that my mind was not on my work. I forgot to attend an important meeting of the officers of the company. One of the clerks under me caught a bad mistake made in an estimate on a carload of goods, and of course saw to it that the manager learned of the incident. I was thoroughly alarmed at the situation, and asked for a week's vacation to think things over. I was determined to resign or find the trouble and remedy it. A few days of earnest introspection at an out-of-the-way mountain resort convinced me that I was suffering from a plain case of mind wandering. I was lacking in concentration. My physical and mental activities at the desk had become desultory. I was careless and shiftless and neglectful, all because my mind was not alertly on the job. When I had diagnosed my case with satisfaction to myself, I next sought the remedy. I needed a complete new set of working habits, and I made a resolve to acquire them. With paper and pencil, I outlined a schedule to cover the working day. First, the morning mail, then the orders to be filled, dictation, conference with subordinates and miscellaneous duties, ending with a clean desk before I left. How is habit formed? I asked myself mentally. By repetition, came back the answer. But I have been doing these things over and over thousands of times, the other fellow in me protested. True, but not in orderly, concentrated fashion, replied the echo. I returned to the office with mind in leash but restless, and placed my new working schedule in force at once. I performed the same duties with the same zest and as nearly as possible at the same time every day. When my mind started to slip away, I quickly brought it back. From a mental stimulus created by willpower, I progressed in habit building. Day after day, I practiced concentration of thought. When I found repetition becoming comfortable, then I knew that I had won. Your ability to train your memory or to develop any desired habit is a matter solely of being able to fix your attention on a given subject until the outline of that subject has been thoroughly impressed upon the sensitized plate of your mind. Concentration itself is nothing but a matter of control of the attention. You will observe that by reading a line of print with which you are not familiar and which you have never seen before, and then closing your eyes, you can see that line as plainly as though you were looking at it on the printed page. In reality, you are looking at it, not on the printed page, but on the sensitized plate of your own mind. If you try this experiment and it does not work the first time, it is because you did not concentrate your attention on the line closely enough. Repeat the performance a few times, and finally you will succeed. If you wish to memorize poetry, for example, you can do so very quickly by training yourself to fix your attention on the lines so closely that you can shut your eyes and see them in your mind as plainly as you see them on the printed page. So important is this subject of control of attention that I feel impelled to emphasize it in such a way that you will not pass it by lightly. I have reserved reference to this important subject until the last, as a climax to this lesson, for the reason that I consider it, by far, the most important part of the lesson. The astounding results experienced by those who make a practice of crystal gazing are due entirely to their ability to fix attention upon a given subject for an unbroken period far beyond the ordinary. Crystal gazing is nothing but concentrated attention. I have already hinted at that which I will now state as my belief, namely, that it is possible, through the aid of concentrated attention, for one so to attune one's mind to the vibration of the ether that all the secrets in the world of unfathomed and uncharted mental phenomena may become as open books which may be read at will. What a thought this is to ponder over! I am of the opinion, and not without substantial evidence to support me, that it is possible for one to develop the ability of fixing the attention so highly that one may tune in and understand that which is in the mind of any person. But this is not all, nor is it the most important part of a hypothesis at which I have arrived after many years of careful research, for I am satisfied that one may just as easily go a step further and tune in on the universal mind in which all knowledge is stored, where it may be appropriated by all who master the art of coming after it. To a highly orthodox mind, these statements may seem very irrational, but to the student, and so far there are but few people in the world who are more than mere students of an elementary grade of this subject, who has studied this subject with any appreciable degree of understanding, these hypotheses seem not only possible, but absolutely probable. But put the hypothesis to a test of your own. You can select no better subject upon which to try an experiment than that which you have selected as your definite chief aim in life. Memorize your definite chief aim so you can repeat it without looking at the written page. Then make a practice of fixing your attention on it at least twice a day, proceeding as follows. Go into some quiet place where you will not be disturbed. Sit down and completely relax your mind and your body. Then close your eyes and place your fingers in your ears, thereby excluding the ordinary sound waves and all of the light waves. In that position, repeat your definite chief aim in life, and as you do so, see yourself, in your imagination, in full possession of the object of that aim. If a part of your aim is the accumulation of money, as it undoubtedly is, then see yourself in possession of that money. If a part of the object of your definite aim is the ownership of a home, then see a picture of that home, in your imagination, just as you expect to see it in reality. If a part of your definite aim is to become a powerful and influential public speaker, then see yourself before an enormous audience, and feel yourself playing upon the emotions of that audience as a great violinist would play upon the strings of the violin. As you approach the end of this lesson, there are two things which you might do, viz. First, you might begin now to cultivate the ability to fix attention at will on a given subject, with a feeling that this ability, when fully developed, would bring you the object of your definite chief aim in life. Or, second, you might tilt your nose in the air and with the smile of a cynic say to yourself, "Bosh," and thereby mark yourself a fool. Take your choice. This lesson was not written as an argument, nor as the subject of a debate. It is your privilege to accept it in whole or in part, or reject it just as you please. Fish don't bite just for the wishin', keep a pullin'. Change your bait and keep on fishin', keep a pullin'. Luck ain't nailed to any spot, men you envy like as not. Envy your job and lot. Keep a pullin', but at this place I wish to state, however, that this is not an age of cynicism or doubt. An age that has conquered the air above us and the sea beneath us, that has enabled us to harness the air and turn it into a messenger that will carry the sound of our voice halfway around the earth in the fractional part of a second, certainly is not an age that lends encouragement to the doubting Thomases or the I don't believe it Joneses. The human family has passed through the Stone Age and the Iron Age and the Steel Age, and unless I have greatly misinterpreted the trend of the times, it is now entering the Mind Power Age, which will eclipse in stupendous achievement all the other ages combined. Learn to fix your attention on a given subject at will for whatever length of time you choose, and you will have learned the secret passageway to power and plenty. This is concentration. You will understand from this lesson that the object of forming an alliance between two or more people, and thereby creating a master mind, is to apply the law of concentration more effectively than it could be applied through the efforts of but one person. The principle referred to as the master mind is nothing more nor less than group concentration of mind power upon the attainment of a definite object or end. Greater power comes through group mind concentration because of the stepping up process produced through the reaction of one mind upon another or others. Persuasion vs. For success, as has been stated in dozens of different ways throughout this course, is very largely a matter of tactful and harmonious negotiation with other people. Generally speaking, the man who understands how to get people to do things he wants done may succeed in any calling. As a fitting climax for this lesson on the law of concentration, we shall describe the principles through which men are influenced, through which cooperation is gained, through which antagonism is eliminated and friendliness developed. Force sometimes gets what appear to be satisfactory results, but force alone never has built and never can build enduring success. The World War has done more than anything which has happened in the history of the world to show us the futility of force as a means of influencing the human mind. Without going into details or recounting the instances which could be cited, we all know that force was the foundation upon which German philosophy has been built during the past 40 years. The doctrine that might makes right was given a worldwide trial and it failed. The human body can be imprisoned or controlled by physical force, but it is not so with the human mind. No man on earth can control the mind of a normal, healthy person if that person chooses to exercise his God-given right to control his own mind. The majority of people do not exercise this right. They go through the world, thanks to our faulty educational system, without having discovered the strength which lies dormant in their own minds. Now and then something happens, more in the nature of an accident than anything else, which awakens a person and causes him to discover where his real strength lies and how to use it in the development of industry or one of the professions. Result, a genius is born. There is a given point at which the human mind stops rising or exploring, unless something out of the daily routine happens to push it over this obstacle. In some minds this point is very low, and in others it is very high. In still others it varies between low and high. The individual who discovers a way to stimulate his mind artificially, arouse it and cause it to go beyond this average stopping point frequently, is sure to be rewarded with fame and fortune if his efforts are of a constructive nature. The educator who discovers a way to stimulate any mind and cause it to rise above this average stopping point without any bad reactionary effects will confer a blessing on the human race second to none in the history of the world. We, of course, do not have reference to physical stimulants or narcotics. These will always arouse the mind for a time, but eventually they ruin it entirely. We have reference to a purely mental stimulant, such as that which comes through intense interest, desire, enthusiasm, love, and so on, the factors out of which a master mind may be developed. The person who makes this discovery will do much towards solving the crime problem. You can do almost anything with a person when you learn how to influence his mind. The mind may be likened to a great field. It is a very fertile field which always produces a crop after the kind of seed which is sown in it. The problem, then, is to learn how to select the right sort of seed and how to sow that seed so that it takes root and grows quickly. We are sowing seed in our minds daily, hourly, nay, every second, but we are doing it promiscuously and more or less unconsciously. We must learn to do it after a carefully prepared plan, according to a well-laid-out design. Haphazardly sown seed in the human mind brings back a haphazard crop. There is no escape from this result. History is full of notable cases of men who have been transformed from law-abiding, peaceful, constructive citizens to roving, vicious criminals. We also have thousands of cases wherein men of the low, vicious, so-called criminal type have been transformed into constructive, law-abiding citizens. In every one of these cases, the transformation of the human being took place in the mind of the man. He created in his own mind, for one reason or another, a picture of what he desired, and then proceeded to transform that picture into reality. As a matter of fact, if a picture of any environment, condition, or thing be pictured in the human mind, and if the mind be focused or concentrated on that picture long enough and persistently enough, and backed up with a strong desire for the thing pictured, it is but a short step from the picture to the realization of it in physical or mental form. The World War brought out many startling tendencies of the human mind, which corroborate the work which the psychologist has carried on in his research into the workings of the mind. The following account of a rough, uncouth, unschooled, undisciplined young mountaineer is an excellent case in point. Fought for his religion. Now great war hero Rotarian's plan to present farm to Arvin York, unlettered Tennessee squirrel hunter by George W. Dixon. How Arvin Cullum York, an unlettered Tennessee squirrel hunter, became the foremost hero of the American Expeditionary Forces in France, forms a romantic chapter in the history of the World War. York is a native of Fentress County. He was born and reared among the hardy mountaineers of the Tennessee woods. There is not even a railroad in Fentress County. During his earlier years, he was reputed to be a desperate character. He was what was known as a gunman. He was a dead shot with a revolver, and his prowess with the rifle was known far and wide among the plain people of the Tennessee hills. One day, a religious organization pitched its tent in the community in which York and his parents lived. It was a strange sect that came to the mountains looking for converts, but the methods of the evangels of the new cult were full of fire and emotionalism. They denounced the sinner, the vile character, and the man who took advantage of his neighbor. They pointed to the religion of the Master as an example that all should follow. Alvin gets religion. Alvin Cullum York startled his neighbors one night by flinging himself down at the mourners. Here are 12 good reasons for failure. The first one is the avowed intention of doing no more than one is paid to do, and the person who makes this avowal may see the other 11 by stepping before a looking-glass. Bench. Old men stirred in their seats and women craned their necks as York wrestled with his sins in the shadows of the Tennessee mountains. York became an ardent apostle of the new religion. He became an exhorter, a leader in the religious life of the community, and although his marksmanship was as deadly as ever, no one feared him who walked in the path of righteousness. When the news of the war reached that remote section of Tennessee and the mountaineers were told that they were going to be conscripted, York grew sullen and disagreeable. He didn't believe in killing human beings, even in war. His Bible taught him, "Thou shalt not kill." To his mind this was literal and final. He was branded as a conscientious objector. The draft officers anticipated trouble. They knew that his mind was made up, and they would have to reach him in some manner other than by threats of punishment. War in a holy cause. They went to York with a Bible and showed him that the war was in a holy cause, the cause of liberty and human freedom. They pointed out that men like himself were called upon by the higher powers to make the world free, to protect innocent women and children from violation, to make life worth living for the poor and oppressed, to overcome the beast pictured in the scriptures, and to make the world free for the development of Christian ideals and Christian manhood and womanhood. It was a fight between the hosts of righteousness and the hordes of Satan. The devil was trying to conquer the world through his chosen agents, the Kaiser and his generals. York's eyes blazed with a fierce light, his big hands closed like a vice, his strong jaws snapped. "The Kaiser," he hissed between his teeth, "the beast, the destroyer of women and children. I'll show him where he belongs if I ever get within gunshot of him." He caressed his rifle, kissed his mother goodbye, and told her he would see her again when the Kaiser had been put out of business. He went to the training camp and drilled with scrupulous care and strict obedience to orders. His skill at target practice attracted attention. His comrades were puzzled at his high scores. They had not reckoned that a backwoods squirrel hunter would make fine material for a sniper in the frontline trenches. York's part in the war is now history. General Pershing has designated him as the foremost individual hero of the war. He won every decoration, including the Congressional Medal, the Croix de Guerre, the Legion of Honor. He faced the Germans without fear of death. He was fighting to vindicate his religion, for the sanctity of the home, the love of women and children, the preservation of the ideals of Christianity and the liberties of the poor and oppressed. Fear was not in his code or his vocabulary. His cod daring electrified more than 1,000,000 men and set the world to talking about this strange, unlettered hero from the hills of Tennessee. Here we have a case of a young mountaineer who, had he been approached from just a slightly different angle, undoubtedly would have resisted conscription, and likely as not, would have become so embittered toward his country that he would have become an outlaw, looking for an opportunity to strike back at the first chance. Those who approached him knew something of the principles through which the human mind works. They knew how to manage young York by first overcoming the resistance that he had worked up in his own mind. This is the very point at which thousands of men, through improper understanding of these principles, are arbitrarily classed as criminals and treated as dangerous, vicious people. Through suggestion, these people could have been handled as effectively as young York was handled, and developed into useful, productive human beings. In your search for ways and means of understanding and manipulating your own mind so you can persuade it to create that which you desire in life, let us remind you that, without a single exception, anything which irritates you and arouses you to anger, hatred, dislike, or cynicism is destructive and very bad for you. You can never get the maximum or even a fair average of constructive action out of your mind until you have learned to control it and keep it from becoming stimulated through anger or fear. These two negatives, anger and fear, are positively destructive to your mind, and as long as you allow them to remain, you can be sure of results which are unsatisfactory and away below what you are capable of producing. In our discussion of environment and habit, we learned that the individual mind is amenable to the suggestions of environment, that the minds of the individuals of a crowd blend with one another, conforming to the suggestion of the prevailing influence of the leader or dominating figure. Mr. J.A. Fisk gives us an interesting account of the influence of mental suggestion in the revival meeting, which bears out the statement that the crowd mind blends into one, as follows. Mental suggestion in the revival modern psychology has firmly established the fact that the greater part of the phenomena of the religious revival are psychical rather than spiritual in their nature, and abnormally psychical at that. The leading authorities recognize the fact that the mental excitement attendant upon the emotional appeals of the revivalist must be classified with the phenomena of hypnotic suggestion rather than with that of true religious experience. And those who have made a close study of the subject believe that instead of such excitement tending to elevate the mind and exalt the spirit of the individual, it serves to weaken and degrade the mind and prostitute the spirit by dragging it in the mud of abnormal psychic frenzy and emotional excess. In fact, by some careful observers familiar with the respective phenomena, the religious revival meeting is classed with the public hypnotic entertainment as a typical example of psychic intoxication and hysterical excess. David Starr Jordan, Chancellor Emeritus of Leland Stanford University, says, "Whiskey, cocaine, and alcohol bring temporary insanity, and so does a revival of religion." The late Professor William James of Harvard University, the eminent psychologist, says, "Religious revivalism is more dangerous to the life of society than drunkenness." It should be unnecessary to state that in this lesson the term revival is used in the narrower signification indicating the typical religious emotional excitement known by the term in question. and is not intended to apply to the older and respected religious experience designated by the same term, which was so highly revered among the Puritans. Lutherans and others in the past. A standard reference work speaks of the general subject of the revival as follows: revivals occur in all religions. When one takes place, a large number of persons who have been comparatively dead or indifferent to spiritual considerations simultaneously, or in quick succession, become alive to their importance, alter spiritually and morally, and act with exceeding zeal in converting others to their views. A Mohammedan revival takes the form of a return to the strict doctrines of the Quran and a desire to propagate them by the sword. A Christian minority living in the place is in danger of being massacred by the revivalists. Pentecostal effusion of the Holy Spirit produced a revival within the infant church, followed by numerous conversions from outside. Revivals, though not called by that name, occurred at intervals from apostolic times till the Reformation, the revivalists being sometimes so unsympathetically treated that they left the church and formed sects, while in other cases, and notably in those of the founders of the monastic orders, they were retained and acted on the church as a whole. The spiritual impulse which led to the Reformation, and nothing is so contagious as enthusiasm. It is the real allegory of the tale of Orpheus. It moves stones, it charms brutes. Enthusiasm is the genius of sincerity, and truth accomplishes no victories without it. Bulwer. The antagonistic one which produced or attended the rise of the Society of Jesus were both revivalist. It is, however, to sudden increase of spiritual activity within the Protestant churches that the term revival is chiefly confined. The enterprise of the Wesleys in Whitefield in this country and England from 173 onward was thoroughly revivalist. Since then, various revivals have from time to time occurred, and nearly all denominations aim at their production. The means adopted are prayer for the Holy Spirit, meetings continued night after night, often to a late hour, stirring addresses, chiefly from revivalist laymen, and after meetings to deal with those impressed. Ultimately, it has been found that some of those apparently converted have been steadfast, others have fallen back, while deadness proportioned to the previous excitement temporarily prevails. Sometimes excitable persons at revival meetings utter piercing cries, or even fall prostrate. These morbid manifestations are now discouraged, and have in consequence become more rare. In order to understand the principle of the operation of mental suggestion in the revival meeting, we must first understand something of what is known as the psychology of the crowd. Psychologists are aware that the psychology of a crowd, considered as a whole, differs materially from that of the separate individuals composing that crowd. There is a crowd of separate individuals, and a composite crowd in which the emotional natures of the units seem to blend and fuse. The change from the first-named crowd to the second arises from the influence of earnest attention, or deep emotional appeals or common interest. When this change occurs, the crowd becomes a composite individual, the degree of whose intelligence and emotional control is but little above that of its weakest member. This fact, startling as it may appear to the average reader, is well known and is admitted by the leading psychologists of the day, and many important essays and books have been written thereupon. The predominant characteristics of this composite-mindedness of a crowd are the evidences of extreme suggestibility, response to appeals of emotion, vivid imagination, and action arising from imitation, all of which are mental traits universally manifested by primitive man. In short, the crowd manifests atavism, or reversion to early racial traits. Diels, in his Psychology of the Aggregate Mind of an Audience, holds that the mind of an assemblage listening to a powerful speaker undergoes a curious process called fusion, by which the individuals in the audience, losing their personal traits for the time being, to a greater or less degree, are reduced, as it were, to a single individual, whose characteristics are those of an impulsive youth of 20, imbued in general with high ideals, but lacking in reasoning, power, and will. Tard, the French psychologist, advances similar views. Professor Joseph Jastrow, in his Fact and Fable in Psychology, says, "In the production of this state of mind, a factor as yet unmentioned plays a leading role, the power of mental contagion. Error, like truth, flourishes in crowds. At the heart of sympathy each finds a home. No form of contagion is so insidious in its outset, so difficult to check in its advance, so certain to leave germs that may at any moment reveal their pernicious power, as a mental contagion. The contagion of fear, of panic, of fanaticism, of lawlessness, of superstition, of error. In brief, we must add to the many factors which contribute to deception, the recognized lowering of critical ability, of the power of accurate observation, indeed of rationality, which merely being one of a crowd induces. The conjurer finds it easy to perform to a large audience because, among other reasons, it is easier to arouse their admiration and sympathy, easier to make them forget themselves and enter into the uncritical spirit of wonderland. It would seem that in some respects the critical tone of an assembly, like the strength of a chain, is that of its weakest member. Professor Le Bon, in his The Crowd, says, "The sentiments and ideas of all the persons in the gathering take one and the same direction, and their conscious personality vanishes." A collective mind is formed, doubtless transitory, by presenting very clearly marked characteristics. The gathering has become what, in the absence of a better expression, I will call an organized crowd, or, if the term be considered preferable, a psychological crowd. It forms a single being and is subjected to the law of the mental unity of crowds. The most striking peculiarity presented by a psychological crowd is the following: whoever be the individuals that compose it. However like or unlike be their mode of life, their occupation, their character, or their intelligence, the fact that they have been transformed into a crowd puts them in possession of a sort of collective mind which makes them feel, think and act in a manner quite different from that in which each individual of them would feel, think and act were he in a state of isolation. There are certain ideas and feelings which do not come into being, or do not transform themselves into acts, except in the case of the individuals forming a crowd. In crowds it is stupidity, and not mother wit, that is accumulated. In the collective mind the intellectual aptitudes of the individuals, and in consequence their individuality, is weakened. The most careful observations seem to prove that an individual emerged for some length of time in a crowd in action soon finds himself in a special state, which most resembles the state of fascination in which the hypnotized individual finds himself. The conscious personality has entirely vanished, will and discernment are lost. All feelings and thoughts are bent in the direction determined by the hypnotizer. Under the influence of a suggestion he will undertake the accomplishment of certain acts with irresistible impetuosity. This impetuosity is the more irresistible in the case of crowds, from the fact that, the suggestion being the same for all the individuals of the crowd, it gains in strength by reciprocity. Moreover, by the mere fact that he forms part of an organized crowd, a man descends several rungs in the ladder of civilization. Isolated, he may be a cultured individual. In a crowd, he is a barbarian, that is, a creature acting by instinct. He possesses the spontaneity, the violence, the ferocity, and also the enthusiasm and heroism of primitive beings, whom he further tends to resemble by the facility with which he allows himself to be induced to commit acts contrary to his most obvious interests and his best-known habits. An individual in a crowd is a grain of sand amid other grains of sand, which the wind stirs up at will. Professor Davenport, in his Primitive Traits in Religious Revivals, says, "The mind of the crowd is strangely like that of primitive man. Most of the people in it may be far from primitive in emotion, in thought, in character. Nevertheless, the result tends always to be the same. Stimulation immediately begets action. Reason is in abeyance. The cool, rational speaker has little chance beside the skillful emotional orator. The crowd thinks in images, and speech must take this form to be accessible to it. The images are not connected by any natural bond, and they take each other's place like the slides of a magic lantern. It follows from this, of course, that appeals to the imagination have paramount influence. The crowd is united and governed by emotion rather than by reason. Emotion is the natural bond, for men differ much less in this respect than in intellect. It is also true that in a crowd of 1,000 men, the amount of emotion actually generated and existing is far greater than the sum which might conceivably be obtained by adding together the emotions of the individuals taken by themselves. The explanation of this is that the attention of the crowd is always directed either by the circumstances of the occasion or by the speaker to certain common ideas, as salvation in religious gatherings. And every individual in the gathering is stirred with emotion, not only because the idea or the shibboleth stirs him, but also because he is conscious that every other individual in the gathering believes in the idea or the shibboleth and is stirred by it too. Some men are successful as long as someone else stands back of them and encourages them, and some men are successful in spite of hell, take your choice. And this enormously increases the volume of his own emotion, and consequently the total volume of emotion in the crowd. As in the case of the primitive mind, imagination has unlocked the floodgates of emotion, which on occasion may become wild enthusiasm or demoniac frenzy. The student of suggestion will see that not only are the emotional members of a revival audience subject to the effect of the composite-mindedness arising from the psychology of the crowd, and are thereby weakened in resistive power, but that they are also brought under the influence of two other very potent forms of mental suggestion. Added to the powerful suggestion of authority exercised by the revivalist, which is exerted to its fullest along lines very similar to that of the professional hypnotist, is the suggestion of imitation exerted upon each individual by the combined force of the balance of the crowd. As Durkheim observed in his psychological investigations, the average individual is intimidated by the mass of the crowd around him, or before him, and experiences that peculiar psychological influence exerted by the mere number of people as against his individual self. Not only does the suggestible person find it easy to respond to the authoritative suggestions of the preacher and the exhortations of his helpers, but he is also brought under the direct fire of the imitative suggestions of those on all sides who are experiencing emotional activities and who are manifesting them outwardly. Not only does the voice of the shepherd urge forward, but the tinkle of the bellwether's bell is also heard, and the imitative tendency of the flock, which causes one sheep to jump because one ahead of him does so, and so on until the last sheep has jumped, needs but the force of the example of a leader to start into motion the entire flock. This is not an exaggeration. Human beings, in times of panic, fright, or deep emotion of any kind, manifest the imitative tendency of the sheep and the tendency of cattle and horses to stampede under imitation. To the student experienced in the experimental work of the psychological laboratory, there is the very closest analogy observed in the respective phenomena of the revival and hypnotic suggestion. In both cases, the attention and interest is attracted by the unusual procedure. The element of mystery and awe is induced by words and actions calculated to inspire them. The senses are tired by monotonous talk in an impressive and authoritative tone, and finally the suggestions are projected in a commanding, suggestive manner familiar to all students of hypnotic suggestion. The subjects in both cases are prepared for the final suggestions and commands by previously given minor suggestions such as stand up or look this way, and so on in the case of the hypnotist, and by all those who think so-and-so stand up, and all who are willing to become better stand up, and so on in the case of the revivalist. The impressionable subjects are thus accustomed to obedience to suggestion by easy stages. And finally the commanding suggestion, come right up, this way, right up, come, I say, come, and so on, which takes the impressed ones right off their feet and rushes them to the front, are almost precisely the same in the hypnotic experiment or seance on the one hand and the sensational revival on the other. Every good revivalist would make a good hypnotic operator, and every good hypnotic operator would make a good revivalist if his mind were turned in that direction. In the revival, the person giving the suggestions has the advantage of breaking down the resistance of his audience by arousing their sentiments and emotions. Tales depicting the influence of mother, home, and heaven, songs like Tell Mother, I'll Be There, and personal appeals to the revered associations of one's past and early life tend to reduce one to the state of emotional response and render him most susceptible to strong, repeated suggestions along the same line. Young people and hysterical women are especially susceptible to this form of emotional suggestion. Their feelings are stirred, and the will is influenced by the preaching, the songs, and the personal appeals of the co-workers of the revivalist. The most sacred sentimental memories are reawakened for the moment, and old conditions of mind are reinduced. Where is my wandering boy tonight? Brings forth tears to many a one to whom the memory of the mother is sacred, and the preaching that the mother is dwelling in a state of bliss beyond the skies, from which the unconverted child is cut off unless he professes faith, serves to move many to action for the time being. The element of fear is also invoked in the revival, not so much as formerly, it is true, but still to a considerable extent and more subtly. The fear of a sudden death in an unconverted condition is held over the audience, and why not now, why not tonight, is asked him, accompanied by the hymn, Oh, why do you wait, dear brother, as Davenport says. It is well known that the employment of symbolic images immensely increases the emotion of an audience. The vocabulary of revivals abounds in them, the cross, the crown, the angel band, hell, heaven. Now vivid imagination and strong feeling and belief are states of mind favorable to suggestion as well as to impulsive action. It is also true that the influence of a crowd largely in sympathy with the ideas suggested is thoroughly coercive or intimidative upon the individual sinner. There is considerable professed conversion, which results in the beginning from little more than this form of social pressure, and which may never develop beyond it. Finally, the inhibition of all extraneous ideas is encouraged in revival assemblies both by prayer and speech. There is therefore extreme sensitiveness to suggestion. When to these conditions of negative consciousness on the part of an audience, there has been added a conductor of the meetings who has a high hypnotic potential, such as Wesley or Finney, or who is only a thoroughly persuasive and magnetic personality, such as Whitefield, there may easily be an influence exerted upon certain individuals of a crowd which closely approaches the abnormal or thoroughly hypnotic. When this point is not reached, there is still a great amount of highly acute, though normal suggestibility to be reckoned with. The persons who show signs of being influenced are then labored with by either the revivalist or his coworkers. They are urged to surrender their will and leave it all to the Lord. They are told to give yourself to God now, right now, this minute, or to only believe now and you shall be saved, or won't you give yourself to Jesus? And so on they are exhorted and prayed with, arms are placed around their shoulders. And every art of emotional persuasive suggestion is used to make the sinner give up. Starbuck in his The Psychology of Religion relates a number of instances of the experiences of converted persons at revivals. One person wrote as follows, "My will seemed wholly at the mercy of others, particularly of the revivalist M. There was absolutely no intellectual element. It was pure feeling. There followed a period of ecstasy. I was bent on doing good and was eloquent in appealing to others. The state of moral exaltation did not continue. It was followed by a complete relapse from orthodox religion." Davenport has the following to say in reply to the claim that the old methods of influencing converts at a revival have passed away with the crude theology of the past. I lay particular stress upon this matter here because, while the employment of irrational fear in revivals has largely passed away, the employment of the hypnotic method has not passed away. There has rather been a recrudescence and a conscious strengthening of it because the old prop of terror is gone. And it cannot be too vigorously emphasized that such a force is not a spiritual-five force in any high and clear sense at all, but is rather uncanny and psychic and obscure. And the method itself needs to be greatly refined before it can ever be of any spiritual benefit whatever. It is thoroughly primitive and belongs with the animal and instinctive means of fascination. In this bald, crude form, the feline employs it upon the helpless bird, and the Indian medicine man upon the ewe need have no fear of competition from the person who says, "I'm not paid to do this and I'll not do it." He will never be a dangerous competitor for your job. But watch out for the fellow who remains at his work until it is finished and performs a little more than is expected of him, for he may challenge you at the post and pass you at the grandstand. Ghost dance votary. When used, as it has often been, upon little children who are naturally highly suggestible, it has no justification whatever and is mentally and morally injurious in the highest degree. I do not see how violent emotional throes and the use of suggestion in its crude forms can be made serviceable even in the cases of hardened sinners, and certainly with large classes of the population, the employment of this means is nothing but psychological malpractice. We guard with intelligent care against quackery in physiological obstetrics. It would be well if a sterner training and prohibition hedged about the spiritual obstetrician, whose function it is to guide the far more delicate process of the new birth. Some who favor the methods of the revival, but who also recognize the fact that mental suggestion plays a most important part in the phenomena thereof, hold that the objections similar to those here advanced are not valid against the methods of the revival. Inasmuch as mental suggestion, as is well known, may be used for good purposes as well as bad, for the benefit and uplifting of people as well as in the opposite direction. This being admitted, these good folks argue that mental suggestion in the revival is a legitimate method or weapon of attack upon the stronghold of the devil. But this argument is found to be defective when examined in its effects and consequences. In the first place, it would seem to identify the emotional, neurotic, and hysterical mental states induced by revival methods with the spiritual uplift and moral regeneration, which is the accompaniment of true religious experience. It seeks to place the counterfeit on a par with the genuine, the baleful glare of the rays of the psychic moon with the invigorating and animating rays of the spiritual sun. It seeks to raise the hypnotic phase to that of the spiritual mindedness of man. To those who are familiar with the two classes of phenomena, there is a difference as wide as that between the poles existing between them. As a straw showing how the wind of the best modern religious thought is blowing, we submit the following from the volume entitled Religion and Miracle, from the pen of Rev. Dr. George Gordon, Pastor Emeritus of the New Old South Church of Boston. For this and professional revivalism, with its organizations, its staff of reporters who make the figures suit the hopes of good men, the system of advertisements, and the exclusion or suppression of all sound critical comment, the appeals to emotion and the use of means which have no visible connection with grace and cannot by any possibility lead to glory, is utterly inadequate. The world waits for the vision, the passion, the simplicity, and the stem truthfulness of the Hebrew prophet. It awaits the imperial breadth and moral energy of the Christian apostle to the nations. It awaits the teacher who, like Christ, shall carry his doctrine in a great mind and a great character. While there have undoubtedly been many instances of persons attracted originally by the emotional excitement of the revival, and afterwards leading worthy religious lives in accordance with the higher spiritual nature, still in too many cases the revival has exerted but a temporary effect for good upon the persons yielding to the excitement, and after the stress has passed has resulted in creating an indifference and even an aversion for true religious feeling. The reaction is often equal to the original action. The consequences of backsliding are well known in all churches after a spirited revival. In others, there is merely awakened a susceptibility to emotional excitement, which causes the individual to undergo repeated stages of conversion at each revival, and a subsequent backsliding after the influence of the meeting is withdrawn. Moreover, it is a fact known to psychologists that persons who have given way to the emotional excitement and excesses of the typical revival are rendered afterwards far more suggestible and open to isms, fads, and false religions than before. The people flocking to the support of the various pseudo-religious adventurers and impostors of the age are generally found to be the same people who were previously the most ardent and excitable converts of the revival. The ranks of the Messiahs, Elijahs, and prophets of the dawn, who have appeared in great numbers in this country and England during the past 50 years, have been recruited almost exclusively from those who have previously experienced the revival fervor in the Orthodox churches. It is the old story of the training of the hypnotic subject. Especially harmful is this form of emotional intoxication among young people and women. It must be remembered that the period of adolescence is one in which the mental nature of the individual is undergoing great changes. It is a period noted for peculiar development of the emotional nature, the sex nature, and the religious nature. The existing conditions at this period render the psychic debauchery of the revival, séance, or hypnotic exhibition particularly harmful. Excessive emotional excitement, coupled with mystery, fear, and awe at this period of life, often results in morbid and abnormal conditions arising in after life. As Davenport well says, "It is no time for the shock of fear or the agony of remorse." The only result of such misguided religious zeal is likely to be a strengthening in many cases of those tendencies, especially in females, toward morbidity and hysteria, toward darkness and doubt. There are other facts connected with the close relation existing between abnormal religious excitement and the undue arousing of the sexual nature, which are well known to all students of the subject, but which cannot be spoken of here. As a hint, however, the following from Davenport will serve its purpose. At the age of puberty, there is an organic process at work which pushes into activity at nearly the same time the sexual and the spiritual. There is no proof, however, of the causation of the latter by the former. But it does appear to be true that the two are closely associated at the point in the physical process where they branch in different directions, that at that critical period, any radical excitation of the one has its influence upon the other. A careful consideration of this important statement will serve to explain many things that have sorely perplexed many good people in the past, in connection with revival excitement in a town, camp meetings, and so on. This apparent influence of the devil, which so worried our forefathers, is seen to be but the operation of natural psychological and physiological laws. To understand it is to have the remedy at hand. But what do the authorities say of the revival of the future, the new revival, the real revival? Let Professor Davenport speak for the critics. He is well adapted for the task. He says, "There will be, I believe, far less use of the revival, meeting as a crass, coercive instrument for overriding the will and overwhelming the reason of the individual man. The influence of public religious gatherings will be more indirect, more unobtrusive. It will be recognized that hypnotization and forced choices weaken the soul, and there will be no attempt to press to decision in so great a matter under the spell of excitement and contagion and suggestion. The converts may be few, they may be many. They will be measured not by the capacity of the preacher for administrative hypnotism, but rather by the capacity for unselfish friendship of every Christian man and woman. But of this I think we may be confident. The days of religious effervescence and passional unrestraint are dying. The days of intelligent, undemonstrative, and self-sacrificing piety are dawning. To do justly, to love mercy, to walk humbly with God, these remain the cardinal tests of the divine in man. Religious experience is an evolution. We go on from the rudimentary and the primitive to the rational and the spiritual. And believe Paul, the mature fruit of the Spirit is not the subliminal uprush, the lapse of inhibition, but rational love, joy, peace, long-suffering, kindness, goodness, faithfulness. Meekness, self-control. The law of concentration is one of the major principles which must be understood and applied intelligently by all who would successfully experiment, until you have learned to be tolerant with those who do not always agree with you, until you have cultivated the habit of saying some kind word of those whom you do not admire, until you have formed the habit of looking for the good instead of the bad there is in others. You will be neither successful nor happy, with the principle described in this course as the master mind. The foregoing comments, by leading authorities of the world, will give you a better understanding of the law of concentration, as it is often used by those who wish to blend or fuse the minds of a crowd so they will function as a single mind. You are now ready for the lesson on cooperation, which will take you further into the methods of applying the psychological laws upon which this philosophy of success is based. If you hesitate or turn backward while under fire, you're not a fighter, you're a quitter, and the devil himself hates the person with a rubber backbone. He smells bad burning. In 16 Lessons teaching, for the first time in the history of the world, the true philosophy upon which all personal success is built. By the end, you have been listening to The Law of Success by Napoleon Hill, Volume 6 of 8, narrated by Michael Stone. Thank you for listening. Find more free wealth classics on our YouTube channel, Audiobook Empire. Subscribe for a new classic every week.